Hey guys, tonight we begin with the gnawing, grumbling, and deeply unfair world of the medieval stomach. A time when what you ate wasn't decided by your appetite or your health, but by a set of laws written by men who had never known a day of hunger in their lives. A world where bread was a status symbol, vegetables were considered dangerous for the wealthy, and spices were worth more than human life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the air in the room is heavy, thick with the scent of damp thatch and old wood smoke that has settled into the very beams of the ceiling. It is early morning, long before the sun has truly risen. The light is weak, a pale grey filtering through the gaps in the shutters, illuminating the dust motes that drift in the cold, still air. You're lying on a pallet stuffed with straw. It rustles every time you shift your weight. The wool blanket pulled up to your chin is rough, scratching against your neck, but it holds the warmth of your body against the biting chill of the room. You can see your breath puffing out in small rhythmic clouds, vanishing into the shadows. Outside, the world is silent save for the dripping of condensation from the eaves and the distant lonely bark of a dog. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1315. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're starving, and the local lord has just declared that the only food in your pantry is illegal for you to eat. In the modern world, we choose our food based on taste, budget, or perhaps a vague attempt at health. We wander through aisles of brightly coloured packages, deciding between pasta or rice, chicken or beef. But in the world you now inhabit, the menu is dictated by the great chain of being. The medieval mind believed that society was a hierarchy ordained by God. The king was at the top, the angels were above him, and the peasants were at the bottom, just slightly above the livestock. And because the universe was ordered, your dinner had to be ordered too. You sit up. Your stomach gives a low, hollow growl. It is a sound you're used to. You head to the hearth. The fire is dead, just a pile of grey ash. You stir it, hoping for a spark. You reach for the bread box. It is a wooden chest, heavy and dark. You open it. Inside sits a loaf. But this isn't the soft, white, fluffy bread of a modern supermarket. This is maslin bread. Or perhaps horse bread. It is dark brown, dense, and heavy as a stone. It is made of a mixture of wheat, rye, and, if the harvest was bad, ground up peas, beans, or even acorns. You pick it up. The texture is coarse. It feels like a brick in your hand. You break off a piece. It doesn't tear softly, it snaps. You take a bite. The sensory reality of medieval peasant bread is the grit. Millstones were made of sandstone. As they ground the grain, the stones ground themselves down too. Every loaf of bread contained a small percentage of rock dust. You chew. You feel the sand grinding against your molars. Crunch. Grind. It is the sound of your own teeth wearing away. By the time you're 30, your teeth will be flat stumps, worn down by the very food that keeps you alive. But you eat it. You have to. Because the manchet bread, the pure white sifted wheat bread, is forbidden. The king and the nobility ate manchet. They believed that their stomachs were refined and delicate. If a noble ate brown bread, they thought it would rot in his gut. Conversely, they believed that your stomach, the peasant's stomach, was gross and tough. Physicians actually wrote this down. They claimed that if a peasant ate white bread, he would get sick. His body wouldn't know what to do with such purity. So, the law enforced biology. The best wheat went to the castle. The husks, the bran, and the rocks went to you. You swallow the dry, gritty mouthful. It sits heavy in your stomach, but you need something to wash it down. You look at the water bucket in the corner. The surface is still. A thin film of dust floats on top. You know better than to drink it. Water is death. Water is where the tanner dumps his lime. Water is where the cows stand. So you reach for the small beer. This is the fuel of the medieval workforce. It is a weak, cloudy ale brewed from the second or third running of the grain. It has very little alcohol, just enough to kill the worst of the bacteria. You dip a wooden ladle into the barrel. The smell is yeasty, sour, and thick. You drink. It is lukewarm. It tastes of soggy grain and fermentation. It coats your throat. It isn't refreshing exactly. It is sustenance. liquid calories. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand. Your skin feels dry, chapped from the wind. You have eaten the bread of the poor. You have drunk the beer of the labourer. But now you have to go to work. You have to produce the food that you're not allowed to eat. You open the door. The smell of the village hits you. Mud, manure, wood smoke. You walk towards the Lord's orchard. You see the trees. They are heavy with fruit. Apples, pears, cherries. They are beautiful. Red and gold in the morning sun. They smell sweet, a sharp contrast to the sour smell of the street. You reach out. You want an apple, just one. But you stop, because fruit is for the rich. In the medieval medical mind, fruit was dangerous. It was cold and moist. It caused fevers, unless it was cooked with sugar and spices. And who had sugar and spices? The Lord. So raw fruit was considered peasant food in some eras, but in others the best fruit was reserved for the Lord's pies. But the real reason you don't pick the apple is the woodward. The guard of the woods, he is watching. If he sees you pick a fruit from the Lord's tree, you lose a hand, or you pay a fine that costs more than your house. So you walk past the abundance, you ignore the sweet smell, you stick to your gritty bread, and as you walk to the fields, you realize that your hunger isn't just a physical state, it is a legal requirement, but the night is far away. And before you can rest again, you have to survive the pottage, the stew that never ends. The pottage. It sits on the hearth, bubbling in a heavy iron cauldron that hangs from a hook blackened by decades of soot. This pot is the centre of the medieval home, and in many ways the centre of your life. It is perpetual stew. You didn't make this stew today, your mother didn't make it yesterday. This stew began weeks ago. The sensory reality of pottage is the layering. Every day something new is thrown in, a handful of dried peas, a few onions, a turnip, a scrap of bacon fat if you're lucky. The new ingredients sink into the old. The flavours merge into a single indistinguishable brown taste. You stir it with a wooden spoon. The steam rises. It smells earthy, savoury and thick. It smells of boiled cabbage and hope. But the texture is the challenge. Without potatoes, which are still in the Andes waiting for Columbus, the thickener is breadcrumbs or oatmeal. The stew is gloopy. It sticks to the spoon. It coats your mouth. You serve yourself a bowl. You eat it with a hunk of the brown maslin bread. It is filling. It is warm. But it is monotonous. You have eaten this flavour every day of your life, and you will eat it until you die. But what if you wanted to spice it up? Spices. In the modern world, pepper is on every table. Cinnamon is in every latte. In the Middle Ages, a pound of pepper was worth a week's labour. A pound of saffron was worth a horse, or a small farm. Spices were the currency of the elite. They didn't just flavour the food, they showed off wealth. The king's pottage was yellow with saffron, spicy with ginger, sweet with sugar. It was a riot of colour and heat. Your pottage is green and brown. It tastes of the soil it grew in. The only spice you have is pot herbs, parsley, sage, garlic, mustard. You grow them in your garden. You chop them up. The smell of fresh garlic is sharp, pungent. It makes your eyes water. You throw it in the pot. It helps. It cuts through the blandness. But there is a danger in the pot too, the lead. We mentioned the lead-glazed pottery, but the cauldron itself, or the spoons, pewter spoons. As you eat your hot acidic pottage, the acid leaches the lead from the spoon. You taste a faint sweetness. Sugar of lead! You smile. The pottage tastes better today. Sweeter. You don't know that the sweetness is poisoning your nerves, but let's leave the kitchen and go to the forest, because the menu there is much more exciting and much more deadly. The king's deer, venison. To you, a deer is a 200-pound package of high-quality protein walking on 4 legs. It is sleek, brown, muscular. You see them at the edge of the woods at twilight. The sensory detail is the silence. You stand perfectly still. The deer raises its head. Its ears twitch. You can smell the musk of the animal. You have a bow. You could shoot it, but you don't. Because venison is a legal term. It doesn't just mean deer meat. It means the king's meat. If you kill a deer, you're stealing from the king's plate. The penalty? We talked about it. Blinding, mutilation. But the temptation? Sometimes a deer dies of natural causes, or a wolf kills it if you find a dead deer. Humble pie, the numbles, the entrails, the liver, the heart, the lungs. The lords ate the haunch, the leg. The servants and the peasants ate the numbles. You bake them into a pie. The smell of baking organ meat is strong, iron-rich, heavy. You eat it. It is rich. It makes you feel strong. But you have to eat it quickly, before the forester smells it. You're eating the garbage of the forest, hoping it doesn't get you hanged. But if the deer were for the king, the fish were for God. Lent, the 40 days before Easter, plus Fridays, plus Wednesdays, plus Saints' days. For almost half the year, meat was forbidden by the church. No flesh. So you ate fish, but you lived inland. The salt herring, we mentioned the tax, but the eating of it. It came in barrels. It was stiff as a board. It was covered in salt crystals. You had to soak it for days. The sensory reality is the water change. You put the fish in a bucket. The water turns cloudy with salt. You pour it out. You add fresh water. You do this 5 times. Finally, you boil it. The smell of boiling salt fish is pervasive. It gets into the walls. It gets into your clothes. The whole village smells like a low tide. You eat it. It is dry, stringy, salty. It makes you thirsty. So you drink more small beer. You are trapped in a cycle of salt and hydration. But the rich, they had fresh fish. They had carp ponds. You walk past the monastery. You see the ponds. The water is still green, reflecting the sky. You see the fat carp swimming lazily near the surface. The monks catch them with nets. They cook them in wine and almond milk. The smell drifting over the monastery wall is divine. Sweet, savoury, rich. You eat your salt herring. You resent the monk. But there was one animal that crossed the class divide. The pig. The pig was the peasant's bank account. It ate garbage. It ate acorns. It turned waste into meat. The pig killing. It happened in November. Martinmas. The sensory experience is visceral. The pig is dragged out. It squeals. A high, piercing sound that makes your ears ring. The knife. The blood. You catch the blood in a bowl. You stir it so it doesn't clot. The steam rises, smelling of iron. You make black pudding. You use everything. The intestines for sausage skins. The bristles for brushes. The fat for candles. For a few weeks you feast. You eat fresh pork, roast pork. The crackling is crisp, salty, greasy. The fat runs down your chin. It is the best time of the year. But then the meat is gone, or salted, and you are back to the pottage. But there is one food that you are legally required to grow, but effectively forbidden to enjoy. Wheat, and the manchet bread again. But let's look at the cheat bread, the second quality bread, and the clap bread, oat cakes. In the north, wheat didn't grow well, so they grew oats, the sensory reality of clap bread. You mix oats and water, you slap the dough between your hands, clap, clap. You bake it on a hot stone. It is hard, dry, it crumbles, it sits in your stomach like a rock, but it keeps you alive. And as you sit there, digesting your oats, smelling the salt fish, watching the smoke from the pottage, you realize the medieval diet was a test of endurance. But the night is coming, and with the night comes the feast. But not for you, for the Lord. The banquet and the subtlety. The banquet. You're not inside the hall. You're outside, standing in the cold courtyard, smelling the feast through the open windows. But even the smell is a revelation. Inside, the great hall is a theatre of food. The tables groan under the weight of warners, appetizers, roasts, and subtleties. The subtlety was not food. It was food disguised as art, sugar sculptures, marzipan castles. Imagine a roasted peacock. But it has been skinned, cooked, and then sewn back into its own feathers. Its beak is gilded with gold leaf. It looks alive, or a cockatrice. The front half of a pig sewn onto the back half of a turkey, or capon. The sensory absurdity. You see this Frankenstein creature being carried in. It is glazed. It shines in the torchlight. The guests applaud. They don't just eat. They watch the performance of excess. The smell is complex. Not just meat, but sweet meat. Sugar was a spice. They put sugar on fish, sugar on eggs, sugar on meat. The rich had black teeth. Because they ate so much sugar, their teeth rotted. It became a status symbol. If you had black teeth, you were rich. People even blackened their teeth artificially to look wealthy. But you, outside, have white teeth, because you eat grit. You watch the servants carry out the void, the leftovers. They dump the trencher bread into the alms basket. You wait by the gate, you and the other villagers. The almoner comes out. He throws the soggy, grease-soaked bread to the crowd. You scramble for it. It is cold. It tastes of someone else's dinner. But it is calories. You eat the Lord's trash. But let's leave the banquet and go to the fast food. Yes, medieval cities had fast food. The cook shop. In London, if you didn't have a kitchen, and many poor people lived in single rooms without hearths, you went to the cook shop. The sensory reality is the grease. You walk down the street. The smell of frying fat is thick. Hot pies, hot sheep's feet. You buy a pie. But what is in it? The mystery meat. There were laws about this too. Cooks were forbidden from selling reheated pies, or pies made from unwholesome meat. But they did. The miller's cat. People joked that if a cat went missing, it ended up in a pie. You bite into the crust. It is tough. The meat inside is grey, spicy, to hide the taste. You chew. You find a bone, a small bone. Is it a rabbit or a rat? You don't ask. You eat. But if the pie was suspect, the ale was essential. We talked about the ale Connor, but the ale steak, the sign. But what if the ale was bad? The scold. If an alewife sold bad beer, she was put in the cucking stool, dunked in the river. But for you, the drinker, the risk was the dregs, the bottom of the barrel. It was thick with yeast and sediment, if you drank too much of it. The gravel, kidney stones, the sensory horror of passing a stone. We talked about the surgery, but the prevention, drink more ale. It was a cycle. But let's move to a food that was neither meat nor bread. Cheese. The white meat. Cheese was the protein of the poor, but it wasn't the soft, creamy brie of France. White meat. Hard cheese. Skimmed milk cheese. The cream went to the Lord for butter. You got the skimmed milk. You made cheese. It was hard as rock. Suffolk bang. It was said that dogs barked at it, that you could use it to pave roads. You had to soak it, or grate it, or just gnaw on it. It tasted of salt and age, but it kept you alive. But sometimes the cheese moved. Maggots. Cheese skippers. If the cheese got old, flies laid eggs. Maggots hatched. Did you throw it away? No, you ate the maggots. Meat, you said. The sensory experience. The cheese is crawling. You close your eyes, you bite. The maggots pop. They taste creamy. It was protein recycling. But let's end this section with the most desperate food of all. The famine. The Great Famine of 1315. It rained. For months. The crops rotted. The animals died. There was no bread, no pottage, no cheese. People ate dogs, cats, rats. Then they ate the seed corn. The grain saved for next year's planting. The sensory reality is the doom. You hold the sack of seed corn. You know that if you eat this, you will have nothing to plant. You're eating your future. But your children are crying. You grind the seed. You make bread. You eat it. And you know that next year you will die. And then the rumours start. The cannibal, whispers in the village. They found a body with the flesh cut off. Mothers eating children. Historians debate how widespread it was, but the fear was real. You looked at your neighbour. He looked hungrier than you. You locked your door. And as you stand there, holding your rock-hard cheese, smelling the cookshop pie, remembering the taste of the seed corn, you realise the medieval world was a place where hunger was the default setting. But the night is coming. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the baker. He's being dragged on a hurdle with a light loaf around his neck. You pass the alewife. She's drying off from the river. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the fish day returns and the salt herring is waiting. Sleep well. The sun rises on a new day. You have survived the famine, or at least the memory of it. The fields are green again, but as you step out of your door, you hear a sound that makes your blood boil. Kuru, kuru. It is a soft, rhythmic, mocking sound. You look up. On the Lord's land, towering above the peasant hut, stands a stone structure. It looks like a fortress tower, but it has hundreds of tiny holes in the walls. The dovecote. In the medieval world, keeping pigeons was a privilege restricted to the nobility. Why? Because pigeons are delicious. Squab. They produce excellent fertilizer, guano, and they are free to feed. Free for the Lord, that is. The sensory reality of the dovecote is the flying tax. You watch as a cloud of grey wings erupts from the tower. Hundreds of birds, they swoop down. Where do they go? To your field. You have just spent weeks ploughing. Your back is stiff. Your hands are calloused. You have scattered your precious seed corn. The pigeons land, they eat the seeds. You grab a stone, you want to throw it, you want to scare them away, but you stop, because under feudal law the pigeons are the Lord's property. If you kill a pigeon, you're a poacher. You could be fined, whipped, or imprisoned. You're legally required to stand there and watch the Lord's dinner, eat your dinner. It was a system where the aristocracy literally parasitized the agriculture of the peasantry, using birds as the delivery mechanism. But if the birds were eating your grain, the church was eating beavers. Let's go back to Lent, the 40 days where meat is forbidden, no beef, no pork, no chicken, but the rich got bored of fish. They wanted red meat. So the theologians got creative. The beaver, they looked at the beaver, it swims, it has a scaly tail. Therefore, the bishop declared, it is a fish. The sensory experience is the beaver tail. You are a servant at a Lenten feast. You carry a platter. On it is the roasted tail of a beaver. It is dark meat. It is rich, fatty. The Lord eats it. He wipes the grease from his chin. Excellent fish, he says. He is eating a mammal. But because of a biological loophole invented to satisfy his gluttony, he is still fasting. And it wasn't just beavers. The barnacle goose. There was a myth that these geese didn't hatch from eggs, but grew on trees over the water, like fruit, or hatched from barnacles on driftwood. Since they were fruit, or sea life, they were not meat. You watch the Lord eat a goose on Friday. You're eating a dried herring. You realize that wealth even buys you the ability to redefine biology. But let's leave the dining hall and go into the kitchen, the hot, smoky, chaotic engine room of the castle. You see the fire. It is massive. An entire ox is roasting on a spit, but the spit has to turn. If it stops, the meat burns on one side and stays raw on the other. Who turns it? A boy? Sometimes. The galley boy. He sits by the fire, shielding his face from the heat, turning the handle for hours. His skin blisters. But often it was an animal. The turn-spit dog. A specific breed, long-bodied and short-legged, like a corgi, bred for one purpose: to run in a wheel. The wheel is mounted on the wall, connected to the spit by a pulley. The dog is put inside. The sensory reality is the Scrabble. The dog runs. Click, clack, click, clack. The wheel turns. The meat turns. If the dog slows down, the cook throws a hot coal into the wheel. The dog runs faster. The kitchen smells of roast beef and wet dog fur. The dog pants, its tongue lolling out, exhausted. It is a machine powered by a living creature. When the dog is too tired, they swap it for another one. Every dog has his day. That phrase comes from the shifts of the turnspit dogs. But let's move from the fire to the table, the salt cellar, a massive ornate vessel made of silver or gold filled with salt. It sits in the middle of the high table. It is the boundary line of social worth. Above the salt, if you sit above the salt, close to the Lord, you are important. You get the good wine, you get the fresh meat, you get the beaver tail. Below the salt. If you sit below the salt, you are a nobody, a distant cousin, a retainer, a slightly wealthy peasant. You get the second ale, you get the trencher bread. The sensory detail is the reach. You're sitting below the salt. Your food is bland. You look at the silver salt cellar. It is just out of reach. You cannot ask for it. That would be presumptuous. You eat your food unsalted. The distance between you and the flavour is only 3 feet, but it might as well be 3 miles. It was a geography of seasoning, but let's end this section with a rule that governed the very act of drinking water. The water bearer. In London, you couldn't just dip a bucket in the conduit. The company of water bearers had a monopoly. They carried water to houses in large wooden tankards known as cobs on their shoulders. The sensory experience is the drip. The water bearer walks into your kitchen. He is wet. He smells of river mud. He pours the water into your jar. "A penny," he says. "I could have carried it myself," you say. "Against the guild rules," he replies. You pay a tax on hydration because a guild has captured the supply chain of moisture. And as you stand there, watching the water bearer leave, Hearing the turnspit dog running in its wheel, smelling the Lord's beaverfish, and watching the pigeons eat your seeds, you realize the medieval world was a place where every resource, from the seed to the salt to the water, was gated behind a rule. But the night is coming. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. A butcher is there. He sold measly pork with tapeworms. You pass the stocks. A man is sleeping there. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the forest calls, and the verderer is watching. Sleep well. The verderer is watching. He stands at the edge of the forest, dressed in green, blending into the shadows like a spirit of the woods. But he is not a spirit. He is a judicial officer of the king's forest, and he carries a verderer's staff. You need wood. Your fire is dead. Your house is freezing. You approach the tree line. You know the rules. You know forest law. You're allowed estovers, the right to take wood, but only dead wood, and only wood you can reach. Hook and crook. You carry a shepherd's crook and a reaper's hook. You cannot carry an axe. An axe is a weapon of deforestation. A hook is a tool of scavenging. The sensory reality is the reach. You stand under a massive oak. You see a perfect dry branch. It is thick. It would burn all night, but it is just out of reach. You stretch. You jump. You hook your crook around it. You pull. Crack. The bark rains down into your eyes. The branch snaps. Or it doesn't. You spend hours fighting the trees for scraps. You're legally mandated to be a scavenger. If you cut a green branch, vert. The verderer steps out. Vert, he says. Find. You drop the branch. You walk away empty-handed. But the forest isn't just about wood. It's about pigs. Pannage. In autumn, the oaks drop acorns. Mast. To a human, acorns are bitter. To a pig, they are ambrosia. You herd your pigs into the forest. The sensory experience is the rooting. The pigs are frantic. They snort, they dig, they crunch the acorns. Crunch, crunch, crunch. But you have to pay. 1 pig for every 10, the verderer says. He takes your fattest pig. You watch your property being confiscated by the forest management system. But let's leave the woods and go to the dairy. Rennet. To make cheese, you need rennet. It curdles the milk. Where do you get it? From the stomach of an unweaned calf. The sensory horror. You have to kill a baby calf. You cut out its 4th stomach, the abomasum. You dry it. You slice it up. You soak the dried stomach in water. The water turns cloudy. It smells of digestive enzymes. You pour this stomach water into your milk. The milk solidifies. It becomes curds. You're eating the product of a baby animal's digestion. It was a brutal cycle. To get the cheese, you killed the calf. To get the milk, you bred the cow. But sometimes the milk went wrong. The witch. If the butter wouldn't churn, if the milk soured. The witch has looked at the cow. The sensory reality is the counter magic. You heat a horseshoe red hot in the fire. You drop it into the milk churn. Hiss. The milk boils. It smells burnt. That burned the witch, you say. You have ruined the milk, but you have saved your soul, you think. It was a waste of resources driven by fear. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate waste. The gong farmer. We met him in the tax section. But the food aspect, the night soil. He carts the waste to the fields. He spreads it. The sensory detail is the growth. The wheat grows tall where the night soil is spread. It is green, lush. You harvest it. You make bread. You're eating the recycled nutrients of the city. It is sustainable, but it is also a loop of parasites. The worm, roundworms. You eat the bread, you get the worm, you feel it moving, you feel the hunger, you go to the apothecary. Wormwood. Bitter, incredibly bitter. You drink the tea, it makes you vomit. The worm comes out. It is long, pale, alive, the sensory horror. You see what was living inside you. You realize that your body is not just yours, it is a host. But let's end this section with a food rule that targeted the very soul. The fast. Not just Lent, but the Ember Days. 3 days, 4 times a year, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. No meat, no fat, only 1 meal a day. The sensory experience is the empty belly. You're working in the fields. You are burning 4,000 calories. You eat a piece of dry bread. You are dizzy. Your hands shake. But the priest says it is good for you. It tames the flesh. The flesh is tamed. It is also starving. And as you stand there, feeling the dizziness, Smelling the burnt milk, watching the pigs eat the acorns you can't touch, you realize the medieval world was a place where your body was constantly being disciplined. By the law, by the church, by the worm. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home, you pass the pillory. A baker is there. He sold a loaf with a stone in it. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house, you bar the door, you're safe. Until tomorrow, when the ale conner comes back, and he wants to sit in your beer. Sleep well. The ale conner has arrived. He's a man of girth, his face flushed with the permanent rosiness of his trade. He wears leather breeches, worn smooth and shiny at the seat. He enters your house, you are brewing ale. The smell is sweet, malty, and comforting. The wort is bubbling in the copper cauldron. Sample, he demands. You pour a puddle of ale onto a wooden bench. He sits in it. He doesn't drink it yet. He waits. He talks about the weather. He talks about the king. He sits there for 30 minutes. Then he tries to stand up. The sensory reality is the stick. If his leather breeches stick to the bench, if there is a sound like ripping Velcro or tearing cloth, the ale is good. It has sugar. It has body. If he slides off, the ale is watered down. Quality, he grunts, peeling himself off the wood. He takes a drink. He nods. Approved. You pay him the fee. You have passed the breeches test. It was a quality control system based on the adhesive properties of sugar and leather. But if the ale was good, the wine was suspicious. The vintner, wine was imported. It came in barrels. You couldn't see inside. Unscrupulous vintners would mix bad wine, vinegar, with good wine, or they would add lead acetate, sugar of lead, to make sour wine taste sweet. The sensory detail is the sweetness. You drink the wine. It is delicious, smooth, sweet. But an hour later, the colic, stomach cramps, sharp, twisting pain, the palsy, your hands shake, you drop the cup, you're being poisoned by the additive. But let's leave the drink and go to the market again, but specifically the pie shop. The cook. He makes meat pies, pasties, but meat's expensive, so he uses the pluck, the lungs, the heart, the liver, the parts nobody wants. He chops them up, he spices them heavily, pepper, cumin. He bakes them in a thick crust. The sensory reality is the mystery. You bite into the pie. The meat is soft, too soft. Is it mutton? Is it cat? There was a rhyme. God sends meat, and the devil sends cooks. You eat it. It fills the hole. But sometimes the pie wasn't meat. It was fruit. The warden pie. Made from warden pears. Hard, gritty pears that had to be cooked for hours. They were dyed red with sandalwood or alkanet. You're eating a pear that has been painted. It was food as a visual trick. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate trick. The mountebank again. He is selling theriac, the universal antidote. It contained 64 ingredients, including viper's flesh. But the mountebank didn't have vipers. He had eels, dried eels. He ground them up. Snake meat, he shouts. You buy it. You eat the eel powder. You feel brave. It was a placebo made of fish jerky. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very structure of your meal. The trencher. The bread plate. We talked about eating it. But the making of it? Trencher bread. It was made from wholemeal. The coarse flour. It was baked to be hard, stale. The sensory experience is the saw. You have to cut the trencher. You use a sharp knife. You saw through the crust. Crunch, crunch. If you cut it wrong, you cut your hand. You're preparing your own plate from a loaf that is essentially a brick. And as you stand there, holding your bleeding thumb, watching the ale conner waddle away in his sticky pants, smelling the lead wine and tasting the mystery pie, you realize the medieval world was a place where you couldn't trust your senses. The sweet was poison. The meat was offal. The plate was bread. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. A vintner is there. He sold bad wine. The wine is being poured over his head. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the saltpeter man comes back. And he wants the dirt under your bed. Sleep well. The saltpeter man stands in your bedroom. He's not looking at the bed frame. He's looking at the dirt floor beneath it. Move the bed, he commands. You drag the heavy wooden frame aside. The straw mattress rustles. The spot where the bed stood is darker than the rest of the floor. It is damp. It is where the chamber pot sat every night for 20 years. The saltpeter man smiles. Rich soil, he says. He raises his pickaxe. Thud. The crust of the floor breaks. The smell hits you instantly. A sharp, stinging scent of ammonia and old decomposition that has been trapped under the earth. It is the chemical ghost of your own sleep. He digs a pit 3 feet deep. He fills his baskets. The dust rises, coating your blankets, your pillow, your only tunic. For the king's cannons, he says, wiping his brow. He leaves you with a crater in your bedroom. He doesn't fill it in. You have to step over a hole in the earth to get into bed. The cold damp rises from the pit all night, chilling you from below. You're sleeping on the edge of a mine, but if the floor was a resource, the ice was a miracle. Let's leave your ruined room and go to the ice house. It is summer. The heat is stifling. The air shimmers over the fields. The butter in your pantry has melted into a yellow puddle. The milk has soured in an hour. But up at the manor house, the Lord is drinking wine, and the wine is cold. How? The ice harvest. In the dead of winter, when the river froze, the Lord sent men like you, out onto the ice. The sensory reality is the saw. You stand on the frozen river. The wind cuts through your wool. You use a massive cross-cut saw to slice the lake into blocks. Zzzt, zzzt. The ice dust flies into your face. You haul the heavy, slippery blocks to the ice house. A deep, brick-lined pit dug into the side of a hill. You pack the ice with straw and sawdust. Now, 6 months later, the Lord opens the door. The straw is damp. The air inside is freezing. The ice has survived the summer. He chips off a piece. He puts it in his cup. You're sweating in the field. He's drinking the ghost of winter. It was a mastery of thermodynamics that was strictly for the elite. But let's move from the cold to the strange, to the food that pretended to be something else. Mock food. During Lent, meat was forbidden, but the rich got bored of fish, so the cooks got creative. Mock eggs. They would take empty eggshells. They would fill them with almond milk jelly, coloured yellow with saffron to look like a yolk. The sensory detail is the wobble. You crack the egg. It looks real, but it is cold, sweet, and tastes of nuts. It is a culinary illusion. Or mock bacon, made from salmon meat, dyed pink with sandalwood, streaked with white pike meat to look like fat. You're eating a fish that has been disguised as a pig. It was a cuisine of deceit, a way to follow the letter of the law while breaking its spirit. But if the rich ate lies, the poor ate eels. The eel pie? We talked about eels as rent, but eating them, you catch an eel. It is slimy, it writhes. You have to skin it. The sensory horror of skinning an eel. You nail its head to a board. You pull the skin off with pliers. It peels away with a wet tearing sound. You chop it up. You bake it in a coffin, crust. The eel is fatty, rich. It sits heavy in the gut. But the worst part? The lamprey. A jawless fish. It looks like a tube of muscle with a sucker mouthful of teeth. It attaches to other fish and sucks their blood. King Henry the Wonder loved them. He died from eating a surfeit of lampreys, the sensory reality. The meat is dense, almost like steak. It has no bones, just cartilage. It tastes muddy, gamey, intense. You boil it in its own blood with wine and spices. You are eating a vampire of the river. But let's leave the water and go back to the bread. The horse bread. This wasn't bread for horses. It was bread made from horse food. Beans, peas, bran. When wheat was scarce, the bakers were allowed to bake horse bread for the poor. The sensory experience is the chew. It is incredibly dense. It doesn't rise. It is like chewing on a compressed block of animal feed. It tastes of dried peas and dust. It gives you gas. The bloat. You walk around with a stomach that feels like a drum. And the rich. They called you bean eaters. An insult. But there was one job that dealt with the bread before it was baked. The miller and the miller's thumb. He tested the flour by rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger as it came out of the chute. Over years his thumb became flattened, broad, spatulate. The gold thumb? People said he grew it that way to weigh down the scale when he measured your grain. The sensory detail is the white ghost. The miller is covered in flour dust. His eyelashes are white. His lungs are white. He coughs, a dry, hacking cough. Miller's lung. He is dying from the dust of your dinner. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the fire itself. The furnage, the oven tax. We mentioned the communal oven, but the enforcement. If you were caught baking a loaf in your own hearth, the oven breaker came. He didn't fine you. He broke your oven. The sensory violence. He takes a sledgehammer. Smash. The clay of your small home oven shatters. The bricks crumble. Your kitchen is ruined. You're left with a pile of rubble and raw dough. You're forced back to the Lord's oven, back to the fee. And as you stand there, looking at your broken hearth, feeling the cold form the saltpetre pit, tasting the horse bread and smelling the lamprey pie, you realise the medieval world was a place where independence was a crime. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. A miller is there. He was caught stealing grain. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the forest calls again. And the woodward is waiting. Sleep well. The woodward is waiting. He stands in the shadow of an ancient oak, blending into the bark and the moss. He wears a tunic of Lincoln green, not for fashion, but for camouflage. In his hand he holds a billhook, a curved blade used for managing the trees but equally effective at managing peasants. You're entering the king's forest. You are hungry. You know that the woods are full of food, mushrooms, berries, roots, rabbits. But the forest is a legal minefield. You see a mushroom, a penny bun, porcini. It is brown, stout, delicious. You reach for it. The woodward steps out. Panage, he says. It is a mushroom, you say. It grows on the king's soil, he replies. It belongs to the king's pigs. You leave the mushroom. You walk on. You see a crabapple tree. The fruit is small, sour, hard. Crabs. You pick one. You bite into it. It draws your cheeks in. It is incredibly sour. The woodward watches you. He allows this. Crab apples are considered too lowly even for the pigs. You're eating the food that the livestock rejected. But the real danger in the forest isn't the apple. It is the poach. You see a hare. It sits in the grass, ears twitching. It is meat. It is a stew. It is survival. You have a stone in your hand. You could throw it. But if you miss, or if you hit it and the woodward sees, the fine of the hare. It is sixpence. A week's wages. You drop the stone. The hare bounds away. You watch your dinner run into the undergrowth. It is a diet of restraint. But if you're starving in the woods, the Lord is feasting in the hall. Let's go to the high table. We talked about the subtlety. But let's look at the cockentrace. This was the height of medieval culinary arrogance. The cook takes a pig and a capon, a large chicken. He cuts them both in half, at the waist. He sews the front of the pig to the back of the chicken, or vice versa. The sensory reality is the needle. The cook is in the kitchen. He's holding a heavy needle and thick thread. He's stitching raw skin to raw skin. The smell of the raw meat is heavy, metallic. He stuffs it. He roasts it. He glazes it with egg yolks and saffron, gold paint. He serves it. The Lord eats a chimera, a mythical beast created by a bored chef. It tastes like pork and chicken. It is a display of dominance over nature. I can rearrange the anatomy of God's creatures for my amusement. But who cleans up the mess? The scullion. The lowest rank in the kitchen. Usually a small boy. He lives in the scullery. The sensory detail is the sand. He doesn't have soap. He cleans the iron pots with river sand and vinegar. He scrubs, scritch, scritch. His hands are raw, red, bleeding. The grease from the cockentrace is stubborn. It is burnt onto the metal. He eats the dregs, the sauce that's stuck to the bottom of the pot. He scrapes it out with his finger. It tastes of burnt saffron and pig fat. He is the human dishwasher. But let's leave the grease and go to the spice, the pepperer, the spice merchant. Pepper was the black gold of the Middle Ages. It masked the taste of the rot. It warmed the cold stomach, but it was taxed, heavily. Peppercorn rent. Sometimes a tenant paid their rent in a single peppercorn. It was a symbolic payment, but it showed how valuable the spice was. The sensory experience of the spice market. You walk past the stall. The smell is intoxicating. Cloves, nutmeg, mace, ginger. It smells of distant lands, of heat, of the sun. You sneeze. The pepper dust is in the air. You buy a grain, a single grain of paradise. You grind it into your pottage. For a moment the brown sludge tastes like the Orient, but spices were also dangerous. Ergot, again, but disguised. Dishonest merchants would mix black dust, floor sweepings, with the pepper. You sprinkle it on your meat. You eat the dust of the market floor. It was a fraud that hit you in the throat. But let's end this section with a food that was meant to be pure. The wafer, the communion host. It was made of the finest, whitest wheat, manchet quality. It was baked in special irons. Wafer irons. The sensory detail is the hiss. The batter is poured onto the hot iron. Sss. The iron is clamped shut. It bakes in seconds. It is thin, crisp, translucent. For the peasant, this was often the only white bread they ever ate. A tiny circle of purity once a week. It melted on the tongue. It had no flavour. It was the taste of the divine, or the taste of nothing. And as you stand there, holding the memory of the wafer, smelling the pepper you can't afford, watching the scullion scrub the pot, and feeling the woodward's eyes on your back, you realise the medieval menu was a map of power. The king ate the myth, the lord ate the meat, the peasant ate the landscape. But the night is deep, the curfew rings, you head home, you pass the pillory, a butcher is there, he sold carrion, meat from an animal that died of disease. The meat is burning under his nose. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the fishmonger comes and he has a porpoise. The sea pig. Sleep well. The fishmonger stands by his cart, but today he isn't selling herring. He is selling a spectacle. On the wooden board, surrounded by melting ice and flies, lies a porpoise. It is grey, smooth, and massive. To the medieval mind, it is a sea pig, a mammal of the ocean. Royal fish, the fishmonger whispers. Technically it belongs to the king, but sometimes a porpoise is overlooked by the Admiralty. The sensory reality is the blubber. The fishmonger cuts a slice. It is thick with fat. It smells of the deep ocean. Oily, fishy, intense. You buy a small piece. It is expensive. You take it home. You boil it with frumenti, wheat porridge. The fat melts into the porridge. It turns rich, heavy, yellow. You eat it. It tastes like pork that drowned. It is a rare treat, a taste of the forbidden ocean. But if the porpoise was a luxury, the eel was a currency. We return to the eel rent. You have paid your rent in eels. But what does the Lord do with them? He makes jellied eels. The sensory experience is the set. He boils the eels. The natural gelatin in their skin leaches out. He lets it cool. The liquid turns into a clear, savoury jelly. The eels are suspended in it, like insects in amber. It is served cold. It wobbles on the spoon. It is a dish that preserves the river in a solid form. But let's leave the water and go to the garden. Pot herbs. We mentioned them. But the medicinal garden. Every housewife grew herbs. Not just for flavour, for survival. Rue. Wormwood. Tansy. Bitter herbs. Why? To kill the worms. To drive away the fleas. To stop the rot. The sensory detail is the crush. You walk through your garden. You step on a sprig of rue. The smell is pungent, acrid. It clears your head. You pick a leaf. You chew it. It is impossibly bitter. A bitter herb for a bitter life, the old women say. You're eating medicine disguised as salad. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate herb, the apiarist, the beekeeper. We talked about the wax, but the honey harvest. You don't have a centrifugal extractor. You have your hands. You crush the comb. The honey flows out. It is warm, sticky, filled with bits of wax and maybe a dead bee or two. You strain it through a cloth. The sensory reality is the sweetness. You lick your fingers. It is pure energy, the concentrated sunlight of 1,000 flowers. It is the only sugar you will ever taste. But the wax? That goes to the church, the Candlemas, February 2nd, the feast of the presentation. Everyone brings their candles to the church to be blessed. The sensory experience is the glow. The church is filled with hundreds of candles. The smell of beeswax is overwhelming. Honey, pollen, smoke. For a moment, the dark medieval winter is defeated by the labour of the bees. But let's end this section with a food rule that targeted the very structure of the week. The fast days. We mentioned Lent. But the Wednesday fast, every Wednesday, no meat, Why? To support the fishing industry. The king wanted a strong navy. The navy needed sailors. Sailors needed fishing boats. Fishing boats needed a market. So, the king mandated that you eat fish. It wasn't religion, it was economics. The sensory reality. It is Wednesday. You want bacon? You have bacon. But you eat a salted herring. You are eating to support the national defense strategy. Your stomach is a tool of the Admiralty. And as you stand there, tasting the salt on your lips, smelling the beeswax candle, feeling the bitter rue on your tongue, and watching the porpoise blubber melt, you realize the medieval world was a place where your diet was a political act. But the night is deep. The curfew rings, you head home, you pass the pillory, a fishmonger is there. He sold stinking fish. The fish is burning under his nose. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the miller comes back, and he wants his multure. Sleep well. The miller stands at the door of his mill. He is covered in white dust, a ghost of the grain. His eyebrows are white, his eyelashes are white, even the hair in his ears is white. He looks like a man made of dough. The mulcher, he says. You hand him your sack of grain. It is heavy. You grew it. You harvested it. You threshed it. He pours it into the hopper. The stones rumble, grind, grind, grind. The floor vibrates. The air is thick with explosive flour dust. He takes his scoop. He takes a portion of the flour. The mulcher, usually 1/16. But his scoop looks large, and he dips it deep. You watch him. You know he is taking more. The miller's thumb, they call it. A thumb flattened by pressing on the scale to cheat the weight. But you cannot argue. He has the monopoly. If you use a hand mill at home, the Lord will break it. You walk away with your reduced sack. You have paid a tax on physics. But if the flour was taxed, the bread was policed. The baker, he is sweating. He is standing in front of the oven. He holds the peel, the long wooden shovel, the assize of bread. The law dictates the weight of the loaf based on the price of wheat. If the wheat price changes, the loaf size changes. The sensory reality is the scale. The baker weighs every lump of dough. He is terrified. If the loaf is light, he is tied to the hurdle, a sled. He is dragged through the streets with the light loaf tied around his neck. The villagers throw mud. So he adds the baker's dozen, 13 loaves for the price of 12, just to be safe. He's baking out of fear, but sometimes he cheats. He adds alum to make the bread whiter, or chalk to make it heavier. You eat the bread. It is gritty. It tastes of limestone. You are eating the geology of the village. But let's leave the bakery and go to the kitchen of the rich. The turnspit dog again. We mentioned him. But let's look at the Sunday roast. The dog has been running for 3 hours. The meat is dripping. The sensory detail is the basting. The cook takes a ladle. He pours the hot fat over the meat. Sizzle. The smell is rich, savoury, overwhelming. But you are the scullion. You're scrubbing the floor with sand. You smell the beef, but you eat the dripping, the fat that falls into the ashes. You scrape it up. You spread it on your brown bread. It tastes of ash and burned grease. But at least you have small beer, the ale conner again. We talked about the leather breeches, but let's look at the ale stake. The sign above the door, a bush. If the ale was bad, the ale conner would make the alewife drink it, all of it, the sensory horror. She stands in the street. The neighbours watch. She has to drink the sour, ropey beer until she is sick. It was a punishment of consumption. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate consumption. The gong farmer again. But the cesspit. The sensory reality is the depth. He climbs down the ladder. The pit is deep, 10 feet. He's wading in the waste of the city. He finds things. Coins. Rings. Bones. He is the archaeologist of the present. He finds the secrets people flushed away. But the smell stays in his skin. He washes in the river, but the scent remains. He smells of money and muck. And as you stand there holding your light loaf, smelling the miller's dust, hearing the turnspit dog pant, and watching the gong farmer descend, you realize the medieval world was a place of extraction. The lord extracted the grain. The baker extracted the chalk. The gong farmer extracted the waste. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the gibbet. The bones are rattling. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the summoner comes back, and he has a citation, sleep well. The summoner stands at your door. He's a man who smells of onions, garlic, and stale wine, a scent profile so distinct that Chaucer wrote poetry about it. He holds a scrap of parchment, a citation. You are summoned to the archdeacon's court, he says. For what, you ask, your heart hammering against your ribs. Gluttony, he sneers, and breaking the fast. He claims you were seen eating a sausage on a Friday. The sensory reality is the grease. The smell of the bacon you cooked in secret is still hanging in the thatch of your roof. It betrays you. The summoner sniffs the air like a bloodhound. I smell the pork, he says. That will be 6 shillings. You pay him the blue bribe to make the citation disappear. You have paid a fine for eating your own pig on the wrong day of the week. It was a tax on calories, enforced by a man who looks like he hasn't missed a meal in decades. But if the church controlled when you ate, the Lord controlled what you ate. Let's go back to the forest. The panage. It is autumn. The oaks are dropping their acorns. Mast. You herd your pigs into the woods. They are frantic with joy. They root in the leaves, snort, crunch. But the Adjuster is watching. He counts the pigs. 1 for the Lord, he says. But here is the twist. The pigs are fattening up. But what about the deer? If there aren't enough acorns for the deer, the Adjuster kicks your pigs out. The deer must eat first, he says. The sensory horror. You have to drag your hungry pigs away from the food. The pigs scream. They fight. They smell the acorns. You're prioritizing the king's wild pets over your own livestock. But let's leave the pigs and go to the river again. The lamprey. We mentioned the king dying of them, but the catching of them. The lamprey basket. You wade into the river. You place the wicker traps. The sensory experience is the slime. You pull the trap up. It is heavy. Inside, a writhing mass of jawless fish. They latch onto your hand with their sucker mouths. You have to pull them off. Pop. The sound of the suction breaking. You sell them to the castle. The cook makes lamprey pie. He bleeds the fish. He mixes the blood with wine and cinnamon. He bakes it. The smell is rich, iron-heavy, metallic. The Lord eats it. He wipes the sauce from his beard. You go home and eat gruel. Oatmeal boiled in water, no salt, no milk, just grey, hot sludge. It fills the stomach, but it doesn't feed the soul. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate hunger. The almoner, the official in the monastery or castle who gave food to the poor. The dole. He stands at the gate. A crowd of beggars pushes forward. The smell of unwashed bodies, sickness and desperation. He hands out the alms bread, but often it is black bread, the worst quality, or mouldy bread. Beggar's bread. The sensory detail is the scrap. You are hungry. You take the bread. It is hard as a rock. You have to soak it in the ditch water just to chew it. You're eating the charity of the rich, which tastes suspiciously like their garbage. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very fire that cooked the food. The smoke farthing again, but the Pentecostal. You walk to the cathedral. You pay the tax, but you look at the sanctuary knocker on the door, a bronze lion's head. If you touch it, you are safe from the law. The sensory reality. You reach out. The bronze is cold, solid. You wonder, if I stole a loaf of bread, could I make it here before the sheriff catches me? You calculate the distance, the speed, the hunger. It is the mathematics of survival. And as you stand there, holding your gruel spoon, smelling the lamprey pie, watching the pigs leave the forest and feeling the cold bronze of the sanctuary, you realize the medieval world was a place where even the food was part of a legal battle. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. A butcher is there. He sold rotten mutton. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the leech collector comes back, and she has a new jar. Sleep well. The leech collector stands at your door. Her jar is full of dark water and writhing black shapes. But today she isn't selling. She is buying. I need bait, she says. Fresh meat. She points to your leg. In the medieval economy of blood, sometimes you are the consumer, and sometimes you are the resource. She offers you a penny to let her leeches feed on you for an hour, to fatten them up for the doctor. The sensory reality is the itch. You sit on the bench. She places the leeches on your calf. You feel the tiny, sharp bites, the tugging, the feeding. You watch your own blood fill the parasites. You are farming your own circulation. When they are full, she pops them off. Your leg bleeds. You press a rag to the wounds. You take the penny. You can buy bread. You have traded hemoglobin for carbohydrates. But if the leech was a parasite, the flea was a roommate. We talked about the flea trap, but let's look at the flea circus. People actually trained fleas. They tied tiny gold wires around their necks. They made them pull miniature chariots. The sensory detail is the squint. You watch the performance at the fair. The fleas are almost invisible, but you see the tiny chariots moving. It is a celebration of the pest that torments you every night. But let's leave the pests and go to the kitchen again. But not for food. For glue. The knacker again. He boils the hooves, the bones, the cartilage. The sensory experience is the stickiness. The glue pot simmers. It smells of boiled horse. You use it to fix your shoe, to mend your stool. You're holding your life together with the boiled remains of your transportation. But if the glue was useful, the ink was essential. Oak gall ink. We mentioned the wasp, but the permanence. The ink is acidic. It burns into the parchment. If you spill it on your clothes, it never comes out. The sensory reality of the scribe. His fingers are stained black, permanently. He looks like he has dipped his hands in shadow. He writes the indenture. The contract that binds you to the land. The ink dries. It turns from black to rust brown. The colour of dried blood. It is a binding spell written in chemistry. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate chemistry. The tanner again. But the urine. He needs stale urine. Chamber lie. He pays for it. The sensory detail is the collection. You save your family's urine in a barrel. It ferments. It smells sharp, biting. You carry it to the tannery. A penny a gallon, he says. You are selling your waste. It is the only thing you produce that the Lord doesn't tax, yet. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very measurement of your life. The passing bell again. But the knell. 3 strokes for a man, 2 for a woman, the sensory reality. You hear the bell, bong, bong, bong. A man has died. You stop working. You count the strokes. Then the years. 1 stroke for every year of the deceased's life. Bong, bong, bong. You count. 40, 50, 60. It stops. Old Thomas, you say. The bell has broadcast his biography to the valley. It is a sonic obituary. And as you stand there, counting the strokes, feeling the itch of the leech bites, smelling the urine barrel, and watching the scribe's black fingers, you realize the medieval world was a place where everything was measured, your blood, your waste, your years. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow. When the salt runs out again, and the gabalus are waiting, sleep well. The gabalus are waiting, but the salt is not your only problem. The sun is up, and with it the chimney man. We talked about the hearth tax, but let's look at the hiding. You have a fireplace, but you don't want to pay the 2 shillings. So you build a false wall. You cover the fireplace with a wooden panel. You paint it to look like the rest of the room. The sensory reality is the cold. You cannot light the fire. The room is freezing. You can see your breath. But the wall looks solid. The chimney man enters. He taps the walls. Thud, thud, hollow, thud. He smiles. He rips down the panel. A concealed hearth, he says. Double tax. You are fined for trying to stay warm in secret. But if the fire was hidden, the light was stolen. The rushlight again. But the grease. Where do you get the fat? From the dripping pan, under the spit where the meat roasts. But the Lord owns the spit, and the meat, and the dripping. The kitchener sells the dripping to the candle maker, if you steal a spoonful of fat to make your own light. Theft of the royal grease. The sensory detail is the skim. You wait until the cook is looking away. You dip a spoon into the pan. The fat is hot, liquid, golden. You pour it into a shell. You hide it in your pocket. It burns your leg as it cools. You're stealing illumination from the Lord's dinner. But let's leave the kitchen and go to the garden. The Heriot again. But the bees. If you died and you had no cow, the Lord took your hives. The driving of the bees. The bailiff comes. He doesn't know how to handle bees. He knocks the skep over. The bees swarm. They sting him. They sting you. the sensory chaos, the buzzing, the shouting, the smell of crushed honeycomb. The Lord gets the wax, but the colony is destroyed. It was a tax that killed the producer. But if the bees were lost, the eels were eternal. The eel skin again, but the window. Before glass was common or affordable, people used oiled cloth, or eel skins, stretched tight, dried, oiled, the sensory reality. You look at your window. It is translucent, yellow, veiny. It smells faintly of fish. The light that comes through is jaundiced. You are looking at the world through the skin of a river monster. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate monster, the executioner again, but the boiling for poisoners. The punishment for poisoning was to be boiled alive. The sensory horror, the cauldron, the water, or oil, the steam, the crowd watches. It is a slow death. It was a punishment designed to fit the crime. You used a liquid to kill, you die by liquid. But let's end this section with a tax that sounds like a joke. The window tax. We talked about it. But the painted window. To avoid the tax, you bricked up the window. But to keep the symmetry of the house, you painted a fake window on the bricks. The sensory irony. You walk down the street. You see a grand house. It has 12 windows, but only 6 are real. The others are paintings, black rectangles with white lines. It is a trompe-l'oeil of prosperity, a visual lie told to the taxman and the neighbours. And as you stand there looking at the fake window, smelling the stolen grease, feeling the bee sting and watching the eelskin glow, you realise the medieval world was a place of illusion. The fire was hidden, the light was stolen, the window was painted, but the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home, you pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house, you bar the door, you're safe. Until tomorrow, when the salt runs out again, and you have to go to the Sultan. Sleep well. The Sultan is busy today. The smoke from the boiling pans drifts across the marsh, mixing with the morning fog. You stand in line with your neighbours, waiting to trade your labour for the white crystals that keep you alive. But the Sultan has news. The king has granted a monopoly, he says, to the queen's brother. The price has doubled. You look at the coins in your hand. You have enough for half a sack. Half a sack means half the meat preserved. It means hunger in February. You buy the salt. You have no choice. But as you walk home, you pass the market cross, and you see something new. A standard. The king's standard weight. A bronze block. The clerk of the market stands next to it. He's checking the merchant's scales. "False weight," he shouts at the cheese seller. He smashes the seller's scale. The wood splinters. The brass weights roll into the mud. The sensory reality is the crash. The violence of bureaucracy. The cheese seller is crying. He has lost his tool of trade. You keep walking. You clutch your salt. But if the market was regulated, the forest was forbidden. The vert. Cutting green wood. You need a new handle for your spade. You see a perfect ash sapling. You cut it. The adjuster steps out. "Vert," he says. "It is a sapling," you say. "It is the king's tree," he says. "3d." You pay. You have bought a stick for the price of a chicken, but let's leave the forest and go to the kitchen again. But not for the cooking, for the washing. The scullion. He is scrubbing the pots. But what does he use? Sand and horsetail. A plant with silica in the stem. Nature's scouring pad. The sensory detail is the rasp. The plant scratching the iron. The boy's hands are raw, but he has a secret. He eats the kitchen stuff, the grease. He is fat, greasy, but healthy. He survives on the calories the Lord discards. But if the scullion was fed, the turnspit dog was tired. The dog has stopped running. It lies in the wheel, panting. The cook kicks the wheel. "Run!" The dog whimpers. It runs. You watch the dog. You feel a kinship. You're both running in circles for someone else's dinner. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate circle. The wheelwright. He makes the wheels for the carts. He heats the iron tire in a fire. He expands it. He fits it over the wooden wheel. He pours water on it. Hiss. The iron shrinks. It binds the wood tight. The sensory experience is the steam. The smell of hot iron and wet wood. The tension of the metal. If the tire breaks, the wheel shatters. The cart falls. The harvest is lost. He holds the economy together with a hoop of iron. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very measurement of the land again. The perch. The rod used to measure land, but the length of the perch varied from 9 feet to 24 feet. The lord used a short perch to measure your rent, so you had more land and paid more. He used a long perch to measure his own land, so he had less land and paid less tax to the king. The sensory reality. You watch the surveyor. He uses a short stick. 20 acres, he says. It is the same field, you cry. Last year it was 15. New stick, he says. You're living in a world where geometry is corrupt, and as you stand there holding your half-sack of salt, watching the wheelwright shrink the tyre, hearing the turnspit dog pant, and feeling the injustice of the short stick, you realise. The medieval world was a place where the rules changed every time you looked away. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. Empty. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the window peeper comes back. And he has a tax on light. Sleep well. The window peeper has gone, his ledger filled with the darkness of your home. You have bricked up the kitchen window to save a shilling. But now you have to cook in the dark. The sensory reality is the fumble. It is noon, but your kitchen is a cave. You're chopping onions by the light of the open door, which lets in a draught that kills the fire. You slice the onion. The knife slips. You cut your thumb. You suck the blood. It tastes metallic, mixing with the sharp, raw flavour of the onion juice. You're preparing dinner by touch. You cannot see if the meat is green. You cannot see if the flour has weevils. You trust the heat of the fire to purify what your eyes cannot judge. The tax on light hasn't just darkened your room, it has darkened your diet. But if you can't see the food, you can taste the acid. Verjuice. Lemons are for the king. Vinegar is taxed, if it was wine first. So what do you use to make your food safe? To cut the grease of the mutton, unripe grapes, or crab apples? You harvest them while they are hard, green, and rock-like. You crush them. The sensory experience is the pucker. The juice is incredibly sour. It strips the enamel from your teeth. It stings the cut on your thumb. It smells green, sharp, aggressive. You pour it over your stale fish. It masks the rot. It is the poor man's preservative. But if the sauce was sour, the pudding was heavy. The bag pudding. We talked about the oven tax, the furnage. To avoid it, you don't bake. You boil. You take flour, sweet, hard fat, and maybe a few dried currants. You wrap the sticky dough in a linen cloth. You tie it tight. You drop it into the cauldron along with the pottage. The sensory detail is the thud. The pudding hits the bottom of the pot. It boils for hours. When you fish it out, it is a grey, heavy cannonball. You slice it. It steams. It smells of wet cloth and hot fat. Peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold. It is a meal that requires no oven, no skill, just patience and boiling water. It sits in your stomach like a stone, releasing energy slowly as you sleep. But let's leave the kitchen and go to the riverbank again, because you crave fresh meat, and you have a skill that requires no net, no rod, and no tax. Trout tickling, guddling. You wade into the stream. You find a deep pool under the roots of a willow tree. The water is freezing. Your arm goes numb. You slide your hand into the darkness under the bank. You feel the slick, muscular side of a trout. It is resting. You don't grab. You tickle. You rub its belly gently. The fish goes into a trance. It stays still. Then, snatch. You throw it onto the bank. It flops in the grass, silver and speckled. The water bailiff patrols the river. If he catches you with a net, poaching, but with your bare hands. I was just washing my hands, you say. The sensory rush, the cold water, the adrenaline, the slippery fish. It is a heist performed with your fingertips. But if the fish was free, the ale was hidden. The leatherjack. Glass is taxed. Pottery is leaded. So you drink from leather. A blackjack. Leather coated in tar to make it waterproof. The sensory reality. You lift the tankard. It smells of pitch and old cowskin. You cannot see the ale inside. Is it clear? Is it cloudy? Is there a fly in it? You drink. The rim is soft, flexible. The ale tastes faintly of tar. But the blackjack has a secret. It is deceptive. The bottom is often thick. The sides are thick. It looks like it holds a pint. It holds half a pint. The alewife smiles. She fills it up. You pay for a pint. You drink a half. You are being cheated by the geometry of leather. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate cheating. The pardon. The summoner again. He sells pardons, slips of parchment that forgive your sins. But are they real? He says they are from the Pope, but the seal looks waxy, soft. The sensory detail is the smudge. You look at the ink. It is fresh. The Pope lives in Rome. It takes months to get a letter. The ink is wet, you say. A miracle, the summoner replies. You buy it anyway, because you are afraid. You hold the damp parchment. It smells of cheap wine, the summoner's breath. You have bought a forgery to save your soul, but let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very defence of the realm, the arrowhead, the sheaf of arrows. Every village had to provide a certain number of arrows for the king's army, but who made them? The goose. The king claimed the feathers. We talked about the left wing, but the goose herd. He drove the geese to market, but before he did, he plucked them, alive. Live plucking, 5 times a year, the sensory horror. The geese are held down. The down is ripped from their breasts. They scream. Their skin is red, bumpy, naked. They are shivering in the cold. But the feathers are soft. They will stuff the king's pillow, or fly on the king's arrow. You watch the naked geese waddle in the mud. They look ridiculous and tragic. And as you stand there holding your tickled trout, tasting the verjuice, feeling the leather of the blackjack and hearing the geese cry, you realize the medieval world was a place where comfort was harvested from pain. The pillow was soft because the goose was cold. The arrow flew true because the bird suffered. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. A man is there. He sold musty meal, mouldy flour. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the surveyor comes back. And he has a chain. Sleep well. The surveyor stands in your field with his chain. It clinks as he unrolls it, iron links dragging through the frost-covered stubble. He is here to measure your land again, but this time he isn't checking the acreage. He is checking the headland, the strip of unploughed land at the end of the field where the ox team turns around. By law, the headland belongs to you. It is waste ground. But the Lord has decided it is productive. Too wide, the surveyor says. You're wasting the Lord's earth. He moves the boundary stone. He steals your turning space. The sensory reality is the cramp. When you plough next season, you will have to turn the oxen in a tighter circle. The yoke will pinch their necks. The plough will jerk. Your muscles will strain to keep the furrow straight. You have lost 10 feet of grass, but you have gained a lifetime of backache. It is a tax on geometry. But if the field was shrinking, the common was disappearing. The enclosure. We talked about the sheep. But let's look at the hedge. To enclose the land, the Lord planted hawthorn. Quickset hedges. The sensory experience is the thorn. You try to cross the field you have walked since childhood, but now there is a wall of living spikes. The hawthorn grows fast. It is dense, impenetrable. You try to push through. The thorns tear your clothes, they scratch your face. You are locked out of your own history by a plant. But let's leave the land and go to the kitchen again. But not for food, for light, the tallow. We talked about the chandler, but the home production? You have a little fat left over from the Martinmas pig. You want to make a candle, but you don't have a mould, so you make a dip. You tie a piece of linen rag to a stick. You dip it in the hot grease. You let it cool. You dip it again. It takes hours. The smell of hot pig fat fills the room. The resulting candle is lumpy, brown, ugly. It burns for 20 minutes. It smokes, but it is light. It is the only thing that stands between you and the crushing darkness of the winter night. You treasure it. You only light it when you absolutely must. Saving the candle, but if the light was precious, the fire was sacred. The banking. At night you don't let the fire go out. You bank it. You cover the embers with ash to keep them alive until morning. Why? Because starting a fire is hard. You need flint and steel. You need tinder, dry fungus. If you lose the fire, you have to go to your neighbour. You carry a seed fire, a glowing coal in a pot. The sensory detail is the transfer. You walk through the snow. You hold the pot. The heat warms your hands. You're carrying civilization from one house to another. If you drop it, you freeze. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate heat. The smith. But specifically, the nail maker. Nails were handmade, one by one. The nailer. Often a woman or a child. She stands by the forge, she heats the iron rod, she hammers the point, she cuts it, she hammers the head, clang, cut, clang. She makes 1,000 nails a day. Her arm is swollen, her hearing is gone. The nails are sold to the carpenter, to the shipwright, to the coffin maker. The entire medieval world is held together by the labour of a deaf woman in a shed. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very air you breathed if you were a musician. The minstrel again. But the tune. If you played a song in a tavern, you had to pay the weight. The official town musician, he had the monopoly on music. No piping without a license, he says. The sensory reality is the silence. You have a flute, you want to play. The tavern is dull, but you can't. You sit in silence. The only sound is the scratching of the rats and the coughing of the miller. You have been silenced by a guild. And as you stand there, holding your unlit dip candle, watching the nailer hammer, smelling the hawthorn hedge, and listening to the silence of the tavern, you realise the medieval world was a place where joy was regulated, light was rationed, and land was stolen by inches. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the salt runs out again, and the gabalus are waiting. Sleep well. The salt is gone. The gabalus are waiting. But today you are not buying salt. You are trading it for relics. We mentioned the feather of Gabriel, but the trade in relics was the biggest industry in Europe. You are a pardoner, or a quester. You travel with a box. Inside you have the toe of St. Peter, the sweat of St. Michael, the breath of Jesus in a sealed vial. The sensory reality of the pardoner is the cell. You stand in the village square. You hold up a bone. It looks like a chicken bone. This is the finger of St. John, you shout. Touch it and your gout will vanish. The peasants crowd around. They smell of hope and desperation. They pay a penny to kiss the bone. You know it is a chicken bone. You ate the chicken last night. But they believe. And their belief makes them feel better. Are you a thief or a therapist? But if the relic was a lie, the pilgrimage was real. The sensory experience of the road to Santiago. You walk for months. Your feet bleed. You sleep in ditches. You eat dust. You carry a scallop shell. When you arrive, you burn your old clothes on the cross of rags. You are reborn. But you have to walk back. It was a spiritual marathon. But let's leave the road and go to the court. The jester. The fool. He was the only man allowed to tell the truth to the king, but he had to be funny. The sensory reality is the fear behind the laugh. He makes a joke about the king's nose. The king laughs. The court laughs. But if the king is in a bad mood, the jester is whipped. He lives on the edge of the king's humour. He's a comedian with a death sentence hanging over his head. But sometimes the fool was natural. A person with learning disabilities, kept as a pet. The sensory horror. He's dressed in motley. He's fed scraps. He's laughed at. It was a cruel entertainment. But let's move to a job that was silent. The hermit. We talked about the bridge hermit. But the anchorite, a person, usually a woman, who was walled into a cell attached to the church. The anchor hold. The bishop says a mass of the dead over her. She enters the cell. The door is bricked up. She has a small window, squint, to see the altar, and a window to the world to receive food. She never leaves. She lives in a box of stone for 40 years. The sensory reality, the smell of her own waste. She has a pit. The cold, the silence. People come to her window. They ask for advice. She's an oracle in a tomb. She has traded her freedom for holiness. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very end of the line, the Heriot again. But the Heriot of the poor, if you had no cow, they took your pot or your coat. But what if you had nothing? God's penny. The priest would cut a lock of hair from the corpse. I take this as a token, he says. He takes a piece of your body because you couldn't pay with gold. It was the ultimate repossession. And as you stand there, watching the anchorite's wall being built, hearing the jester's laugh, smelling the pardoner's bone, and feeling the priest cut your hair, you realise the medieval world was a place where everything was claimed. The body, the soul, the laugh, the silence. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the window peeper comes back, and he has a telescope. Sleep well. The window peeper has a telescope. It is a crude device, a brass tube with 2 lenses, but it represents a new level of surveillance. He's standing on a nearby hill, scanning the rooftops of the village. He isn't just counting windows now, he's looking for dormer windows, those little attic windows that people built to sneak light into the upper floors. You watch him from the crack in your shutter. He adjusts the focus. You pull back into the shadows. The state has extended its vision. But while the window peeper watches the roof, the excise man is watching the cellar. The saltpeter man again? No. The soap boiler again? No. The candle inspector. We talked about the candle tax, but the enforcement was a sensory nightmare. The inspector would come into your house. He would count your candles, but he would also weigh them. This candle has been burned, he says, but you didn't pay the tax on the tallow. I made it from my own sheep, you protest. Illegal rendering, he says. He confiscates the candle. He leaves you in the dark. But let's leave the house and go to the market again. The forestalling again. But let's look at the regrating of butter. Butter was perishable. It had to be sold quickly. But the regrater would buy it all. He would salt it heavily. He would pack it in barrels. Salt butter. He would sell it in winter for double the price. The sensory reality is the rancid taste. You buy the butter in January. It is yellow, hard, and smells of old milk. You spread it on your bread. It tastes like a barn floor. You're eating the memory of summer, preserved in greed. But if the butter was bad, the bread was lighter. The assize of bread again. But let's look at the baker's peel. The long wooden shovel used to put bread in the oven. If a baker was caught cheating, he was tied to his own peel. The sensory humiliation. He is strapped to the shovel. He's carried through the streets. People throw flour at him. Here is the man who sells air, they shout. It was a punishment that turned his tool into his pillory. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate tool, the executioner again. But the sword. In Germany, nobles were beheaded with a sword. It was considered honourable, but the sword had to be sharp. The sensory detail is the swing. The executioner practices on cabbages or sheep. He stands on the scaffold. The noble kneels. Whoosh! The sound of the blade cutting the air. Thud! The sound of the head hitting the basket. If he misses, if he hits the shoulder, the crowd riots. They stone the executioner. He is a performer. His stage is the scaffold. His review is survival. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very soil of the grave again. The grave wax. Adipocere. In certain soil conditions, body fat turns into a soapy, waxy substance. Grave robbers would harvest it to make candles. Corpse candles. They believed these candles had magical powers. They could make you invisible or find treasure. The sensory horror. You light a candle. It smells sweet, cloying, like rotting lilies. You are burning the fat of your ancestors to light your way to a crime. It was the ultimate recycling of the human form, and as you stand there, smelling the corpse candle, watching the baker on his peel, tasting the rancid butter, and feeling the gaze of the telescope, you realize the medieval world was a place where everything was consumed. The living, the dead, the light, the dark. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house, you bar the door, you're safe, until tomorrow, when the doomsday book is opened, and the final audit begins. Sleep well. The doomsday book. It sits on a heavy oak table in the centre of the village hall. It is bound in thick leather, reinforced with iron corners. It looks less like a book and more like a weapon. The king's commissioners stand over it. They are Normans. They speak a version of French you barely understand, but their tone is unmistakable. How many ploughs, they ask. How many oxen? How many pigs? The sensory reality of the Doomsday Survey is the interrogation. You stand before them, hat in hand. The scribe dips his quill. Scritch! He records your cow. He records your mill. He records the pond where you catch eels. Once it is written in the book, it is eternal. You cannot hide the cow next year. The book remembers. The villagers called it Doomsday because, like the Last Judgment, there was no appeal. The record was final. You walk away, you feel lighter, but not in a good way. You feel hollowed out. The king now owns the knowledge of everything you possess. But if the king demanded knowledge, his court demanded dinner. The right of purveyance. The king is travelling. He is bringing his court. 500 people. The king's takers ride ahead. They enter your village. We need wheat, they say. We need ale. We need carts. They take your wagon. They dump your hay on the side of the road. They load your grain. They hand you a tally stick, a piece of wood with notches. The king will pay you later, they say. The sensory experience is the empty barn. You stand there, holding a stick. You cannot eat the stick. You cannot plant the stick. But the king has eaten your winter survival. It was legal robbery, performed by men in velvet. But let's leave the empty barn and go to the forest again. But not for the wood, for the boar, the wild boar, a monster of the woods, 300 pounds of muscle and rage, with tusks that can rip a man open. Hunting it was the sport of kings. The sensory reality of the boar hunt is the thunder. You hear the horses, the dogs, the horn. Blart! The boar bursts from the undergrowth. It is black, bristly, terrifying. It smells of musk and old earth. The king strikes it with a spear. If you killed a boar, even in self-defence, you were interfering with the royal game. You had to let the monster trample your garden. You had to let it root up your turnips, because its life was worth more than your livelihood. But if you couldn't eat the boar, could you eat the swan? The royal bird. All mute swans belong to the crown. We talked about the marking. But the eating? Roasted swan. The bird was skinned, roasted. Then the skin, with feathers, was put back on. It was served looking like it was about to fly. The sensory detail is the gold beak. They gilded the beak with gold leaf. The meat was dark, oily, fishy. It tasted of the river mud, but the king ate it, because it was rare. You, the peasant, ate rook pie. You climbed the trees. You stole the baby crows from the nests. You baked them. They tasted of bitterness, but they were free. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate luxury. The sugar baker. Sugar was new, expensive, white gold. The sugar baker worked in a hot room. He boiled the cane juice. He poured it into conical moulds. Sugar loaves. The sensory experience is the sticky heat. The air smells of caramel and burning. The floor is sticky. The walls are sticky. He refines the sugar with bull's blood. To clarify the syrup, they added blood. The blood coagulated, trapping the impurities. The scum rose to the top. He skimmed it off. The white sugar that remained was pure. The rich ate it by the spoonful. Their teeth turned black. The black smile. It was a status symbol. It showed you could afford sugar. You, with your white teeth, polished by the grit in your bread, were obviously poor. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very structure of the market. The stallage. You want to sell your onions. You go to the market. You put your basket on the ground. Stallage, the beadle says. Penny for the ground. I am holding the basket, you say. Picage, he says. Did you stick a pole in the ground to hold a sign? No. Terrage, he says. Penny for standing still. The sensory reality. You shift your weight. You're tired. You want to sit. But sitting costs money. Standing costs money. You're paying rent on the footprint of your own shoes. And as you stand there, shifting from foot to foot, holding your tally stick, smelling the king's roast swan, and watching the sugar baker wipe the blood from his hands, you realize the medieval world was a place where every comfort was a privilege, and every necessity was a fee. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. A man is there. He sold watered milk. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe. Until tomorrow, when the manorial court sits, and you have been summoned. Suit of court. Sleep well. The manorial court. The court baron. It is held in the great hall of the Lord's house, or sometimes in the nave of the church, or even under a specific ancient tree on the village green. You are there because you have to be. Suit of court. Attendance is mandatory. If you are absent, you are amerced, fined. The sensory reality of the court is the drone. The steward sits on a raised bench. He holds a roll of parchment. He reads names. He reads complaints. He reads fines. His voice is monotonous, flat, blending with the buzzing of flies and the shuffling of feet. John the smith, fined 1 penny for letting his pig root in the churchyard. Alice the widow, fined 2 pence for brewing bad ale. Thomas the miller, fined for taking excessive toll. You stand there for hours. Your legs ache. The air is stuffy, smelling of unwashed wool and old rushes. You are bored, but you cannot leave. You are witnessing the machinery of a local control. It is petty. It is repetitive. It is expensive. But if the fine was annoying, the bridle was terrifying. The common scold. A legal term for a troublesome woman who argued too much with her neighbours. The punishment? The scold's bridle, or the branks. An iron cage that went over the head. It had a metal plate that slid into the mouth and pressed down on the tongue. Sometimes the plate had spikes. The sensory horror. You are the woman. You argued with the baker about the weight of a loaf. Now you are wearing iron. The metal is cold against your cheeks. The plate tastes of rust and saliva. You cannot swallow properly. You cannot speak. The beadle leads you through the village on a chain. The neighbours stare. They don't laugh. They look away. They know how easily the bridle could fit them. It was a tax on speech, a physical silencing of dissent. But if you were a man, and you committed a crime, you might get a chance to read for your life, the benefit of clergy. In the medieval world, the church had its own laws. Priests could not be tried by secular courts, and priests were the only ones who could read. So the test for being a priest was reading. If you were sentenced to hang for theft, you could claim benefit of clergy. The judge would hand you a Bible, usually open to Psalm 51. Have mercy upon me, O God, the neck verse. The sensory reality is the blur. You're a thief. You cannot read. But you have memorized this one verse. Everyone has. You hold the heavy book. Your hands are shaking. The letters dance on the page. Black ink, red rubrics. You don't look at them. You look at the judge. You recite the Latin. Miserere mei Deus. If you stumble, you hang. If you recite it correctly. The judge nods. The book saves him, he says. Instead of the gallows, you get a brand on your thumb. A hot iron M for malefactor. Sizzle. The pain is sharp. The smell of burning skin fills the court. But you are alive. You have used a loophole of literacy to cheat the hangman. But what if you refuse to speak at all? The peine forte et dure, the strong and hard punishment. We mentioned this briefly, but the sensory weight of it deserves a moment. If you were accused of a felony, the king could confiscate your land, but only if you were convicted, and you could only be convicted if you entered a plea. So, to save their family's inheritance, some men refused to plead. They stood mute. The law's response was the press. You are taken to the dungeon. You are laid on the cold stone floor. A sharp rock is placed under your spine. A board is placed on your chest. They stack weights on the board. Iron, stone, lead. Will you plead? The sheriff asks. You stare at the damp ceiling. You clamp your jaw. You think of your son who will keep the farm if you die silent. They add more weight. Your ribs crack, snap. The sound echoes in the small room. Your breath comes in shallow, whistling gasps. They feed you bad bread and stagnant water on alternate days. You are being crushed to death by the weight of the legal system. It is a suicide mission fought with silence. But let's leave the dungeon and go to the door of the church. The sanctuary knocker. A heavy bronze ring, usually shaped like a lion's head, or a grotesque face, mounted on the church door. If you were running from the law, from the sheriff, from the mob, you ran to the church. The sensory experience is the sprint. Your lungs burn, your boots slip on the mud. You can hear the hue and cry behind you, the shouting, the dogs. You reach the door. You grab the cold metal ring. Clang. Sanctuary, you scream. The moment you touch the ring, the law stops. You're on God's ground. The sheriff stops at the gate. He cannot touch you. You're safe for 40 days, but you're trapped. You cannot leave the churchyard. You sleep on the tombstones. You eat what the monks give you. After 40 days, you have to abjure the realm. You confess your crime. You strip to your shirt. You carry a wooden cross. You walk barefoot to the nearest port and leave England forever. If you step off the road, you are executed. It was a walk of shame that led to exile. And as you stand there, watching the man holding the sanctuary knocker, hearing the drone of the manorial court, Smelling the burning skin of the branded thief and feeling the silence of the woman in the bridle, you realize the medieval world was a maze of rules. If you knew the secret path, the verse, the ring, the silence, you might survive. But the night is deep. The curfew rings, you head home, you pass the pillory. A man is there. He sold musty oats. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house, you bar the door, you're safe until tomorrow when the plague doctor comes back. And he has a posy, a nosegay of flowers, to hide the smell of death. Sleep well. The plague doctor stands at your door again. He holds a small bouquet of dried flowers, a posy, rosemary, rue, lavender. He presses it to the beak of his mask, inhaling deeply. To him, the scent of the flowers is a shield against the invisible arrows of disease. But you smell the vinegar he has soaked his coat in. It is sharp, acidic, overpowering. He checks your armpits. He checks your neck. Clear, he mutters. You breathe. You have survived another inspection. But if the doctor checked your body, the searcher of the dead checked your corpse. We mentioned her before, the old woman, the hag. But the sensory reality of her job is the touch. She enters the house where someone has died. She's immune, or so they say. She touches the cold skin. She looks for the tokens, the purple spots of the plague. If she finds them, she locks the door from the outside. She paints the red cross, but sometimes she lies for a fee. He died of a fever, she whispers, pocketing your coin. She is the gatekeeper of the quarantine, a grandmother who holds the power of imprisonment in her wrinkled hands. But let's leave the plague and go to the market again, but not for food, for justice. The duck, the cucking stool. We mentioned the scold's bridle, but the ducking stool was for cheating. If a brewer sold bad ale, or a baker sold light bread, they were tied to a chair at the end of a long beam over the river or the pond. Duck him, the crowd shouts. The sensory reality. The water is cold, murky, filled with sewage. The chair plunges in, the shock, the water filling the nose, the mud in the hair. They pull him up. He gasps, splash, down again. It was public humiliation combined with waterboarding. But if the water was punishment, the fire was purification. The heretic. If you believed the wrong thing, if you read the Bible in English, the stake, the sensory horror, the bundle of faggots, wood, the smell of pitch, the smoke. But before the fire, there was the abjuration. You could recant. You could say, I was wrong. Then you had to carry a faggot, a bundle of wood, on your shoulder during a procession to the church, as a symbol that you deserved to be burned, but were spared. You had to wear a badge of a burning faggot on your sleeve for the rest of your life. It was a tax on your conscience, paid in shame. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate conscience, the pardoner again. He sells indulgences. 1,000 years off purgatory, he cries. The sensory detail is the seal. The indulgence is a slip of parchment. It has a wax seal, red wax. It looks like blood. You buy it. You hold it. It feels like a contract. Does it work, you ask? Only if you believe, he says, counting your coins. He's selling you a receipt for a product you will never see. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very measurement of your land. The perambulation. Beating the bounds. We talked about bumping the boys' heads. But the reason? Maps were rare. Memory was fallible. So the community had to physically walk the line. They walked through hedges. They walked through streams. They walked through houses if they were built on the line. Passage through the house. The sensory reality. You are eating dinner. The door opens. The priest, the mayor, and 20 boys walk through your kitchen. They climb out your back window. This is the line, the mayor says. They tramp mud on your floor. They disturb your peace. But they are maintaining the geometry of the parish. And as you stand there, watching the mayor climb out your window, smelling the vinegar of the plague doctor, feeling the phantom heat of the stake, and holding your indulgence, you realize the medieval world was a place where boundaries were enforced by bodies, by feet, by heads, by burning. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the salt runs out again, and the gabalus are waiting. Sleep well. The salt is gone. You're scraping the bottom of the barrel again. The gabalus are waiting. But today, you're not buying salt. You're trading it for information. The peddler. We talked about him, but let's look at his pack. It is a small wooden box with drawers. Inside, a universe of small necessities, pins, needles, ribbons, and chapbooks. Tiny, cheap books. A single sheet of paper folded into 8 pages. They tell stories. Robin Hood. The King and the Cobbler. The Witch of Edmonton. The sensory reality is the crumple. The paper is rough, grey, cheap. The ink smudges on your fingers. You read the story by the firelight. It is the Netflix of the 16th century, a portal to another world. But the peddler also sells ballads, songs printed on paper. Broadsides. He sings them to you. A murder ballad, a political satire. You learn the tune, you buy the sheet, you pin it to the wall of your cottage, if you have one. The wall becomes a library, but if the peddler brought news, the postboy brought orders. The post. Before the mail service, the king had posts. Riders stationed every 20 miles. If you heard a horn, toot toot, you got out of the way. Make way for the king's post. If your horse was in the way, the postboy could commandeer it. The sensory experience is the cloud of dust. The rider gallops past. Mud flies. Your own horse is taken. You are left standing in the road. You have been drafted into the communication network. But let's leave the road and go to the kitchen again. But not for food, for medicine. The still room. In a large house, the lady had a room for distilling. She made cordials, waters, rose water, hungry water, rosemary. The sensory detail is the alembic, the glass still, the fire, the drip, drip, drip of the essence. The room smells of concentrated flowers. It is a laboratory of scent. She uses the water to wash her face, to flavour her pudding, to cure a headache. It was chemistry as a domestic art. But if the lady distilled flowers, the witch distilled poisons? No, usually just love potions. We talked about Spanish fly, but let's look at apple pips. You count them. 1, I love. 2, I love. 3, I love, I say. Or yarrow. You put a sprig of yarrow in your nose. You twist it. If your nose bleeds, your love is true. The sensory reality. You're standing in the garden. You twist the herb in your nostril. It tickles. It hurts. A drop of blood falls. He loves me, you cry, wiping blood from your lip. It was divination by nosebleed. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate divination. The sin-eater, again. But the bowl, he drank from a wooden bowl. The mazer, but he never washed it. He believed the sins stayed in the wood. The sensory horror. The bowl is stained dark with old ale and spit. It smells of fermentation. He drinks from it every time. He is drinking a history of guilt. But let's end this section with attacks that targeted the very sound of the village again, the passing bell, but specifically the soul bell. It rang while the person was dying, to scare away demons, the sensory reality. You are dying, you're in pain. And suddenly, a massive bell starts ringing right over your head. If you live near the church, bong, bong, it vibrates in your chest. It terrifies you. The demons are coming, you think. It was a sonic assault on the dying, and as you stand there hearing the bell, smelling the rosewater, feeling the nosebleed, and watching the postboy ride away on your horse, you realize the medieval world was a place where every sense was mobilized. The smell of the saint, the sound of the bell, the taste of the salt. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the window peeper comes back, and he has a ladder. Sleep well. The ladder scrapes against the stone. Scritch. Thud. It is the window peeper. He's climbing to the attic. You thought you were clever. You bricked up the lower windows, but you left the dormer, the small window in the roof. You thought, surely the king does not tax the sky. He does. The sensory reality is the face in the dark. You're in the attic. It is dusty, smelling of old straw and dry rot. You're hiding a few sacks of grain. Suddenly a face appears at the glass. It is distorted, ghostly. He taps on the pane with a metal rod. Tink, tink. 1 shilling, he mouths. You have been caught by an alpinist of the bureaucracy. He climbs down. You hear his boots crunch on the gravel. You're paying for the light that hits your roof. But if the light was taxed, the darkness was polluted. The sea coal. Wood was expensive. So in London they burned sea coal, coal gathered from the beaches of Northumberland. It burned hot, but it burned dirty. The sensory experience is the yellow fog. You walk into the city. The air is thick, yellow, sulphurous. It tastes of brimstone. It stings your eyes. You cough. You spit into a rag. The spittle is black. The London cough. You're breathing the Industrial Revolution centuries before it happens. The smoke coats the buildings. It turns the white stone of the cathedral grey. It turns your lungs to charcoal. But the coal had to get there. The collier. The ship that carried the coal. It was a dangerous trade. The ships were heavy, overloaded. The sensory horror of the wreck. You are a coastal peasant. It is a storm. You see a ship hit the rocks. You don't run to help. You run to wreck. The false light. There is a rumour, dark, whispered, that some villagers tied a lantern to a cow. They walked the cow along the cliff. The ship thought it was another ship bobbing in the water. It steered towards it. Crash. The ship breaks. The coal spills. The sailors drown. The sensory detail is the scavenge. The next morning the beach is black with coal and bodies. You ignore the bodies. You gather the coal. God's gift, you say. You're heating your home with the debris of a tragedy. But let's leave the coast and go to the kitchen again. But not for food. For cutlery. The spoon. You have 1 spoon. It is wooden or horn. You carry it with you, in your hat or your belt. The sensory reality. You go to a feast. You pull out your spoon. It is stained with the memory of 1,000 meals. Porridge, stew, ale. You lick it clean. You put it back in your pocket. It is your only personal tool for eating. But the rich, they had apostle spoons, silver spoons with the heads of the apostles on the handle. If you were a rich godparent, you gave one to the baby, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. The sensory envy. You watch the baby gum the silver. You chew on your splintery wooden spoon. It was a class divide you could taste. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate tool, the smith again. But the armourer, the riveter. He makes the armour, but he has to articulate it. The sensory detail is the pinch. He is fitting the gauntlet. He slides the metal plates over each other. Click-clack. If he gets it wrong, the armour pinches the knight. It cuts his skin. He works with oil of olives to keep the joints moving. The workshop smells of salad dressing and hot steel. He is a tailor of iron. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very sound of the celebration. The minstrel again, but the string tax. Okay, mostly a cost, but felt like a tax. Strings broke. Gut strings. They were expensive. If a minstrel broke a string during a performance for the Lord. The fumble. The music stops. The silence is heavy. The Lord frowns. Bad omen, he says. The minstrel is unpaid. He is kicked out. He sits in the mud trying to tie a knot in a sheep's intestine, and as you stand there, holding your black spoon, smelling the sea-cold smoke, watching the wrecker gather the drift and hearing the silence of the broken lute, you realise. The medieval world was a place where everything was fragile. The string, the breath, the ship, the law. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory. Empty. You pass the stocks. Empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the salt runs out again, and the miller is waiting, and he has a golden thumb. Sleep well. The miller stands by the river, his thumb resting on the beam of the scale. It is broad, flattened, the golden thumb of legend and resentment. He smiles, his teeth white against his flour-dusted face. The mulcher, he says. You hand over the sack, you watch the scale. You know he is cheating you. You know the weight is wrong. But you also know that the Lord's court will uphold the miller's word over yours. You take your reduced flour, you walk away. The sound of the millstone, grind, 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 follows you, a rhythmic reminder that the very geology of the village is working against you. But as you walk, you pass the alehouse, and you see the ale conner. He's not sitting in a puddle today, he's tasting. The sip, he dips a ladle, he drinks, he spits it out. Sour, he barks. Find, the alewife argues. It is the heat, she cries. The thunder soured the milk, and the thunder soured the ale. It was a common belief. Thunder curdled liquids. The sensory reality is the fear of the storm. You watch the sky. If it storms, your milk spoils, your beer spoils, your livelihood turns to vinegar. The weather is an economic predator. But if the ale was sour, the bread was dangerous. The ergot again. We talked about the fire, but the dancing mania, St. Vitus's dance. In 1518 in Strasbourg, a woman started dancing. She didn't stop. Others joined her. Hundreds of people dancing in the street, foaming at the mouth, bleeding from their feet. They danced until they died of exhaustion. Why? Ergot, mass hysteria, a curse, the sensory horror, the music. Musicians were hired to play them out of it. The drums, the pipes, the frantic, jerky movements of the dancers, the smell of sweat and fear. You watch from the window. You're terrified. Is it contagious? Will your feet start moving? It was a plague of motion. But let's leave the street and go to the church again. But not for prayer, for sanctuary, the frith stool, a stone chair near the altar. If you sat in it, you were safe. The sensory experience is the cold stone. You're a fugitive. You sit in the chair. The stone sucks the heat from your legs. You're surrounded by candles. The monks chant. You're safe, but you're a prisoner of God. If you step off the chair, the sheriff can grab you. You sleep sitting up. You eat sitting up. You're a statue of fear. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate fear. The executioner again, but the boiling again. We mentioned poisoners, but counterfeiting, coining, the burning. Women were burned for coining. Men were hanged. Why? Because hanging a woman was considered immodest. Her skirts might fly up. Burning was cleaner. The sensory irony. You are burned to death to protect your modesty, the smoke, the heat, the crowd. It was a gendered execution. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very measurement of your land. The ploughland, carucate. The amount of land a plough team could till in a year. It varied. A heavy soil carucate was smaller. A light soil carucate was bigger. The sensory reality is the soil. You pick up a handful of dirt. Is it clay? Is it sand? The tax collector decides. Clay, he says. Smaller acres, higher tax. You crumble the dirt. It feels gritty. You're paying a tax on the texture of the earth. And as you stand there, holding the dirt, watching the dancer collapse, smelling the sour ale and feeling the cold of the frith stool, you realize the medieval world was a place where the physical properties of matter, texture, weight, movement, were all potential crimes. But the night is deep. The curfew rings, you head home, you pass the pillory, empty, you pass the stocks, empty, you enter your house, you bar the door, you are safe, until tomorrow, when the salt runs out again, and the gabalus are waiting. Sleep well, eep. The salt is gone, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel again. The gabalus are waiting, but today you are not buying salt, you are trading it. For information, the peddler. We talked about him. But let's look at his pack. It is a small wooden box with drawers. Inside, a universe of small necessities. Pins, needles, ribbons, and chapbooks. Tiny cheap books. A single sheet of paper folded into 8 pages. They tell stories. Robin Hood. The King and the Cobbler. The Witch of Edmonton. The sensory reality is the crumple. The paper is rough, grey, cheap. The ink smudges on your fingers. You read the story by the firelight. It is the Netflix of the 16th century, a portal to another world. But the peddler also sells ballads, songs printed on paper. Broadsides. He sings them to you. A murder ballad, a political satire. You learn the tune, you buy the sheet, you pin it to the wall of your cottage, if you have one. The wall becomes a library. But if the peddler brought news, the postboy brought orders. The post. Before the mail service, the king had posts. Riders stationed every 20 miles. If you heard a horn, toot toot, you got out of the way. Make way for the king's post. If your horse was in the way, the postboy could commandeer it. The sensory experience is the cloud of dust. The rider gallops past. Mud flies. Your own horse is taken. You're left standing in the road. You have been drafted into the communication network. But let's leave the road and go to the kitchen again. But not for food, for medicine. The still room. In a large house, the lady had a room for distilling. She made cordials, waters, rose water, hungry water, rosemary. The sensory detail is the alembic, the glass still, the fire, the drip, drip, drip of the essence. The room smells of concentrated flowers. It is a laboratory of scent. She uses the water to wash her face, to flavour her pudding, to cure a headache. It was chemistry as a domestic art. But if the lady distilled flowers, the witch distilled poisons? No, usually just love potions. We talked about Spanish fly, but let's look at apple pips. You count them. 1, I love. 2, I love. 3, I love, I say. Or yarrow. You put a sprig of yarrow in your nose. You twist it. If your nose bleeds, your love is true, the sensory reality. You're standing in the garden. You twist the herb in your nostril. It tickles. It hurts. A drop of blood falls. He loves me, you cry, wiping blood from your lip. It was divination by nosebleed. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate divination. The sin-eater again. But the bowl. He drank from a wooden bowl, the mazer. But he never washed it. He believed the sins stayed in the wood. The sensory horror. The bowl is stained dark with old ale and spit. It smells of fermentation. He drinks from it every time. He is drinking a history of guilt. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very sound of the village again. The passing bell, but specifically the soul bell. It rang while the person was dying, to scare away demons, the sensory reality. You are dying. You are in pain. And suddenly a massive bell starts ringing right over your head, if you live near the church. Bong, bong. It vibrates in your chest. It terrifies you. The demons are coming, you think. It was a sonic assault on the dying, and as you stand there, hearing the bell, smelling the rosewater, feeling the nosebleed and watching the postboy ride away on your horse, you realize the medieval world was a place where every sense was mobilized. The smell of the saint, the sound of the bell, the taste of the salt. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the window peeper comes back, and he has a ladder. Sleep well. The ladder scrapes against the stone. Scritch. Thud. It is the window peeper. He's climbing to the attic. You thought you were clever. You bricked up the lower windows. But you left the dormer, the small window in the roof. You thought, surely the king does not tax the sky. He does. The sensory reality is the face in the dark. You're in the attic. It is dusty, smelling of old straw and dry rot. You're hiding a few sacks of grain. Suddenly a face appears at the glass. It is distorted, ghostly. He taps on the pane with a metal rod. Tink, tink. 1 shilling, he mouths. You have been caught by an alpinist of the bureaucracy. He climbs down. You hear his boots crunch on the gravel. You're paying for the light that hits your roof. But if the light was taxed, the darkness was polluted. The sea coal. Wood was expensive. So, in London they burned sea coal. Coal gathered from the beaches of Northumberland. It burned hot, but it burned dirty. The sensory experience is the yellow fog. You walk into the city. The air is thick, yellow, sulphurous. It tastes of brimstone. It stings your eyes. You cough. You spit into a rag. The spittle is black. The London cough. You're breathing the Industrial Revolution centuries before it happens. The smoke coats the buildings. It turns the white stone of the cathedral grey. It turns your lungs to charcoal. But the coal had to get there. The collier. The ship that carried the coal. It was a dangerous trade. The ships were heavy, overloaded. The sensory horror of the wreck. You are a coastal peasant. It is a storm. You see a ship hit the rocks. You don't run to help. You run to wreck. The false light. There is a rumour, dark, whispered, that some villagers tied a lantern to a cow. They walked the cow along the cliff. The ship thought it was another ship bobbing in the water. It steered towards it. Crash. The ship breaks. The coal spills. The sailors drown. The sensory detail is the scavenge. The next morning the beach is black with coal and bodies. You ignore the bodies, you gather the coal. God's gift, you say. You're heating your home with the debris of a tragedy. But let's leave the coast and go to the kitchen again. But not for food, for cutlery. The spoon. You have one spoon, it is wooden, or horn. You carry it with you, in your hat or your belt. The sensory reality. You go to a feast. You pull out your spoon. It is stained with the memory of 1,000 meals. Porridge, stew, ale. You lick it clean. You put it back in your pocket. It is your only personal tool for eating. But the rich, they had apostle spoons, silver spoons with the heads of the apostles on the handle. If you were a rich godparent, you gave one to the baby, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. The sensory envy. You watch the baby gum the silver. You chew on your splintery wooden spoon. It was a class divide you could taste. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate tool, the smith again. But the armourer, the riveter, he makes the armour, but he has to articulate it. The sensory detail is the pinch. He's fitting the gauntlet. He slides the metal plates over each other, click-clack, if he gets it wrong. The armour pinches the knight. It cuts his skin. He works with oil of olives to keep the joints moving. The workshop smells of salad dressing and hot steel. He's a tailor of iron. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very sound of the celebration. The minstrel again. But the string tax. Okay, mostly a cost, but felt like a tax. Strings broke. Gut strings. They were expensive. If a minstrel broke a string during a performance for the Lord. The fumble. The music stops. The silence is heavy. The Lord frowns. Bad omen, he says. The minstrel is unpaid. He's kicked out. He sits in the mud trying to tie a knot in a sheep's intestine, and as you stand there, holding your black spoon, smelling the sea coal smoke, watching the wrecker gather the drift and hearing the silence of the broken lute, you realize the medieval world was a place where everything was fragile. The string, the breath, the ship, the law. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the salt runs out again, and the miller is waiting, and he has a golden thumb. Sleep well. The miller stands by the river, his thumb resting on the beam of the scale. It is broad, flattened, the golden thumb of legend and resentment. He smiles, his teeth white against his flour-dusted face. The mulcher, he says. You hand over the sack. You watch the scale. You know he is cheating you. You know the weight is wrong. But you also know that the Lord's court will uphold the miller's word over yours. You take your reduced flour. You walk away. The sound of the millstone, grind, 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 follows you. A rhythmic reminder that the very geology of the village is working against you. But as you walk, you pass the alehouse, and you see the ale conner. He's not sitting in a puddle today. He's tasting. The sip. He dips a ladle. He drinks. He spits it out. Sour, he barks. Find. The alewife argues. It is the heat, she cries. The thunder soured the milk, and the thunder soured the ale. It was a common belief. Thunder-curdled liquids. The sensory reality is the fear of the storm. You watch the sky. If it storms, your milk spoils. Your beer spoils. Your livelihood turns to vinegar. The weather is an economic predator. But if the ale was sour, the bread was dangerous. The ergot again. We talked about the fire, but the dancing mania, St. Vitus dance. In 1518 in Strasbourg, a woman started dancing. She didn't stop. Others joined her. Hundreds of people dancing in the street, foaming at the mouth, bleeding from their feet. They danced until they died of exhaustion. Why? Ergot, mass hysteria, a curse, the sensory horror, the music. Musicians were hired to play them out of it. The drums, the pipes, the frantic, jerky movements of the dancers, the smell of sweat and fear. You watch from the window. You're terrified. Is it contagious? Will your feet start moving? It was a plague of motion. But let's leave the street and go to the church again. But not for prayer, for sanctuary, the frith stool, a stone chair near the altar. If you sat in it, you were safe. The sensory experience is the cold stone. You are a fugitive. You sit in the chair. The stone sucks the heat from your legs. You're surrounded by candles. The monks chant, "You're safe, but you're a prisoner of God." If you step off the chair, the sheriff can grab you. You sleep sitting up. You eat sitting up. You're a statue of fear. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate fear. The executioner again. But the boiling again. We mentioned poisoners. But counterfeiting, coining. The burning. Women were burned for coining. Men were hanged. Why? Because hanging a woman was considered immodest. Her skirts might fly up. Burning was cleaner. The sensory irony. You are burned to death to protect your modesty. The smoke, the heat, the crowd. It was a gendered execution. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very measurement of your land. The plough land. Carricate. The amount of land a plough team could till in a year. It varied. A heavy soil carricate was smaller. A light soil carricate was bigger. The sensory reality is the soil. You pick up a handful of dirt. Is it clay? Is it sand? The tax collector decides. Clay, he says. Smaller acres, higher tax. You crumble the dirt. It feels gritty. You're paying a tax on the texture of the earth, and as you stand there, holding the dirt, watching the dancer collapse, smelling the sour ale, and feeling the cold of the frith stool, you realize the medieval world was a place where the physical properties of matter, texture, weight, movement, were all potential crimes. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the salt runs out again, and the gabelous are waiting. Sleep well. Sleep. The gabelous are waiting at the door of the grenier sel, the salt warehouse. In France, under the gabelle, you were not just taxed on salt. You were forced to buy it. Sel du devoir, the salt of duty. Every person over the age of 8 was legally required to purchase a specific amount of salt every year at a price set by the king, even if you didn't need it, even if you still had salt from last year. The sensory reality is the pile. You walk into the warehouse. It is dim, humid. The salt is piled in mountains against the stone walls. It isn't white. It is grey, dirty, mixed with grit and floor sweepings. The official weighs your quota. He forces you to take the sack. It is heavy. It smells of damp earth and brine. £7, he says. Pay. You pay a fortune for dirt-caked salt you didn't want, and if you don't use it, if you try to save it, the gabelous search your house. If they find old salt, they fine you for not consuming your duty. You're legally obligated to be salty. But if the salt was a burden, the royal feast was a minefield. Let's go to the king's table, to the pregustator, the royal taster. The king sits before a magnificent spread, roasted peacock, venison, lamprey pie, but he cannot eat, not yet. The sensory experience is the cold food. The taster has to try everything first. He takes a bite of the peacock. He sips the wine. He dips a piece of bread in the sauce. The king waits. He watches the taster's face. Is he turning green? Is he clutching his throat? No, he is fine. The king eats, but by now the food is lukewarm. The grease has congealed on the venison. The sauce has formed a skin. The king eats cold food his whole life because he is terrified of arsenic. He also uses a unicorn horn, narwhal tusk. He touches it to the food. He believes it will sweat if there is poison. The sensory detail. The king dipping a long, spiraled bone into his soup. He is dining with a magical dipstick. It is a meal seasoned with paranoia. But let's look at the food itself, specifically the subtlety. We mentioned the sugar sculptures, but the scale, the sugar castle. A model of a fortress made entirely of sugar paste and marzipan. It has towers. It has soldiers. It has a moat made of jelly. It sits in the centre of the table. It glistens under the torchlight. The sensory reality is the stickiness. It is humid in the hall. The sugar begins to weep. The castle sags. A tower melts. It smells of cloying sweetness. But the guests don't eat it. It is for looking. While you starve in the village, the lord builds castles out of calories just to watch them melt. It was edible architecture for the eyes only. But let's leave the sugar and go to the sea again. The royal fish. The whale. If a whale washed up, it belonged to the king. But did the king eat it? Yes. Whale tongue. Whale tail. The sensory horror of the rendering. The whale is cut up on the beach. The blubber is boiled down. The smell is atrocious. a heavy, oily, rotting stench that travels for miles. The meat is dark, coarse, it tastes like beef marinated in fish oil. The king eats it with peas. You, the peasant, watch from the dunes. You could use that blubber for your lamp. You could use the bone for your tools, but you cannot touch it. It is royal carrion. But let's move to a job that dealt with the leftovers of the poor, the pottage again. But the bottom of the pot scraper. In the communal kitchen, or the monastery, the food stuck to the cauldron. The sensory detail is the char, the black burnt crust at the bottom. The scullion scrapes it out. Scrape, scrape. He eats it. It tastes of iron and carbon. It is the only part of the meal that nobody else wants. But if the scullion ate char, the student ate words, the commons. In the university, Oxford or Cambridge, the students ate together, but the food was rationed. The size of a fist, the sensory reality. The bread is hard, the beer is weak, the student is hungry. He is studying logic, but his stomach is growling. He learns that knowledge requires a certain amount of starvation. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very water you cooked with, the water rate. In the city, if you wanted a quill, a small pipe, running from the main conduit to your house, you paid a massive rent. The sensory experience is the trickle. You turn the tap, a wooden spigot. The water comes out, a thin, clear stream. It is a luxury. Your neighbour has to walk to the public fountain. He carries buckets. He spills water on his boots. You watch him from your window. You have paid for the privilege of dry feet. It was a tax on convenience. And as you stand there watching the water trickle, smelling the burnt sugar of the subtlety, seeing the king eat his cold venison, and feeling the weight of the compulsory salt sack, you realise the medieval world was a place where consumption was never simple. It was a duty, a risk, a status symbol. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You pass the pillory, empty. You pass the stocks, empty. You enter your house. You bar the door. You're safe until tomorrow, when the summoner comes back, and he has a black book. Sleep well. The summoner holds the black book. It is bound in leather that has been dyed dark with iron and oak galls. It smells of tannins and judgment. He opens it. The pages are parchment, scraped thin, filled with columns of names. He isn't here for a bribe today. He is here for the Lenten inquest. It is the season of Lent. Meat is forbidden, eggs are forbidden, cheese is forbidden. You're supposed to be eating saltfish and bread. But the summoner has a nose like a wolf. He sniffs the air of your kitchen. I smell bacon, he says softly. You freeze. You did put a bacon rind in the pottage. Just a scrap. A piece of skin to give flavour to the watery cabbage. You fished it out before he arrived, but the scent lingers. It hangs in the thatch. It clings to the soot. There is no meat, you lie. He walks to the pot. He dips his finger in. He tastes the broth. Fat, he whispers. Animal fat. He writes your name in the black book. You have been caught cooking with flavour. The sensory reality is the guilt of the palate. You are a criminal because you wanted your soup to taste like something other than hot water. You will be fined. You will be shamed. It was a policing of the taste buds, but if the church policed the pot, the king policed the grave, the escheator. This was the official who handled escheats, land that reverted to the crown. Imagine the scene. Your neighbour has died. He has no sons. He has no will. The escheator arrives. He carries a box of green wax, the official wax of the exchequer. He seals the doors of the dead man's house. He melts the wax. He presses the royal seal onto the lock. The sensory detail is the sealing, the smell of hot beeswax and verdigris, copper which makes it green, the soft squish of the stamp. The house is now a tomb of property. No one can enter. The grain in the barn belongs to the king. The tools belong to the king. The cat belongs to the king, unless it runs away. You watch the house sit empty. The weeds grow. The roof sags. It is a monument to bureaucratic reclaiming. But let's leave the empty house and go to the forest one last time. The drift of the forest. Once a year they drive the animals, but they also check the dogs, the expeditation again. We talked about the chisel, but let's look at the knotted rope. If you couldn't pay the fine, you had to hang your own dog, the sensory horror. You stand under the tree. You hold the rope. The dog looks at you. It trusts you. The forester watches. The law, he says. You do it. Or you pay a month's wages. Most people pay. They starve to save the dog. It was a test of humanity, priced in silver. But let's move to a job that dealt with the ultimate price, the alchemist again, but the antimony, a metal, toxic, used as a medicine. The perpetual pill, an antimony pill. You swallowed it. It irritated your gut. It purged you. But the metal wasn't digested. It came out the other end. You retrieved it from the chamber pot. You washed it. You used it again. And when you died, you left it to your children. The family pill. The sensory reality. You hold the small grey metal ball. Your grandfather swallowed this. Your father swallowed this. Now you swallow it. It is an heirloom of purgation, a reusable toxic bullet. It connects the generations through the digestive tract. But let's end this section with a tax that targeted the very end of the line. The Heriot again, but the Heriot of the body. In some serfdoms, the lord didn't just take the best beast. He took the best chattel, the best object. If the peasant had no cow, the lord took the pot, or the blanket, or the door. Imagine the funeral. You return to the house. The door is gone, taken by the bailiff. The wind blows through the open frame. The house is open to the world. You have lost your father, and you have lost your privacy. And as you stand there, looking at the missing door, holding the perpetual pill, smelling the green wax of the ashita, and tasting the forbidden bacon fat, you realize the medieval world was a place where nothing was truly yours. Not your house, not your dog, not your digestion. But the night is deep. The curfew rings. You head home. You hang a blanket over the doorway. You enter your house. You sit in the dark. You are safe until tomorrow, when the doomsday book is opened and the final audit begins. Sleep well. The blanket hanging over your doorframe flutters slightly in the night breeze. It isn't a solid wood door, the Lord took that, but it blocks the wind. The fire in the hearth has finally burned down to a soft white ash. The glow is gone. The heat is fading, leaving behind a cool, still silence in the room. You're no longer the peasant staring at the empty salt box. You're no longer the poacher hiding the hare. You're no longer the scullion scraping the burnt pot, or the baker sweating over the assize. The long, exhausting, hungry day of the Middle Ages is over. The woodward has put away his billhook. He is asleep in his hut, dreaming of trees that belong to no one. The adjuster has stopped counting the pigs. The summoner has put away his black book. The ink has dried. The accusations are silenced. The king has finished his feast. The sugar castle is melted. The peacock feathers have been put away. He's just a man in a nightshirt, snoring in a draughty castle, digesting a swan that tasted of mud. The pigeons are sleeping in the dovecote, heads tucked under wings, no longer stealing your grain. The eels are sleeping in the mud of the river. The smoke from the hidden kiln has drifted away into the sky, joining the clouds where no law can reach it. You can let go of the hunger now. The bread tax cannot touch you. The salt tax cannot sting you. The fast days are over. As you lie there, feeling the weight of your modern duvet, softer than straw, cleaner than wool, you can appreciate the profound luxury of a full stomach and an untaxed pantry. The history we have walked through tonight was a history of deprivation. It was a history of absurdity. It was a testament to the incredible creativity of the powerful when it comes to controlling the sustenance of the powerless. But it was also a history of survival. Despite the grit in the bread, the people ate. Despite the salt tax, they cured the meat. Despite the forest laws, they found the wood. Humanity is stubborn. We find loopholes. We tickle trout. We bake open tarts. We endure. And now your endurance is rewarded with rest. The ledger is closed. The tally sticks are burned. The debt is forgiven for the night. Take a deep breath. Inhale the air that belongs to no one. Feel your chest rise and fall. That rhythm is yours. It is the one thing the state could never quite figure out how to meter. Let your shoulders drop. The yoke of the oxen is gone. The weight of the harvest is gone. The world outside is still complicated. The modern grocery store has its own rules. The bureaucracy is still humming in the background. But in this room, in this moment, there is only quiet. There is no toll bridge between you and sleep. There is no gatekeeper demanding a fee for your dreams. You are free to drift, to float away from the hard earth, away from the mud and the stone, into the soft, untaxed darkness. The village is sleeping, the castle is sleeping, the history books are closed. You have survived the system. Now rest. Good night.